and what we're into now, design and temporality, right? 1 and 2. Time and being is not really engaged until 1962 in a lecture, right? The second part, 3 ways. Kant's doctrine of the schematism and of time as preliminary stage of the problem of temporality. So we'll go back to Kant. This is Kant and the Problem of Metaphysics, 1929. And was ist das Ding? What is the thing? Also, he has, on the interrogation, the manner of asking about the thing. Actually, the manner of asking about objectivity. It's very important, right? And then the ontological foundation of Descartes' cogito sum and the incorporation of medieval ontology into the problem of the res cogiton. This is engaged somewhat in the age of the world picture and a little bit in the question concerning technology. And then finally, the treatise on time of Aristotle, discerning the phenomenal basis and the limits of ancient ontology. That's 1927. That's the fuller part of the basic problems of phenomenology. So in order to get the whole project in mind, you have to read, the basic problems of phenomenology as a kind of propedeutic, and the understanding of Aristotle, that study. Then you read the Kant study of 29, the debate with Cassira in Davos in 29, and then you go to 62 on time and being. And then, of course, there are all these lectures in between, and the meditations on Nietzsche, Hölderlin, there's courses on, Descartes, there's courses on poetry, the pre-Socratics with Eugen Fink. Yeah, so anyway, yeah.
I started reading the essay in technology slowly, and even that essay is incredibly dense.
Yes.
I mean, it's like, by the 3rd paragraph, it's already like multiple concepts.
Right. Beautiful unfolding.
Yeah.
I mean, the unfolding is the Wesen, really, in a way.
The
when
difference
you do this
between
German word,
technology itself and the essence of technology.
Yeah.
I mean, that's like 20
I know
pages.
Chris is coming late, so
It's not the same thing, and technology is different than just the technology. So it's
Did it help how you read this to understand?
yeah, because there are certain phrases.
So in a way, this
will
German
reveal
word is
itself.
very good for that
But
purpose.
it's even more
It really means,
so
essence that's usually translated, but it's really an active unfolding, right? So one way of translating this Wesen is the active unfolding. And if we're in a process like this, right, we're always in this process of the active unfolding. And that's what Heidegger is really working with when he talks about the essence of poetry. It's not getting only to a fixed origin, it's about unfolding what poetry is, taking the predicate of the, of the notion. So this is very important to keep in mind, as you read this and going forward. And the English language is not good. We just say essence or the essence of something, or we'll say, it's an essentializing tendency. These things are very far away from the German word Wesen. Yeah, Wesen. Yeah. So anyway, all right. Well, I might as well start. I mean, I guess it's 2:30 already. So 78 through 83 are devoted to time and temporality. This is the end. This is the horizon of Dasein, under the horizon of time, being under the horizon of time, or really where you could say the real title of this book is not the couple being and time, not the coupling or the conjunction, but really as being as time. And you begin to see this in chapter 6, temporality and within timeness. So of course Heidegger is asking first the question, to set this up, what is the nature and the status and structure of time, the human existence as temporal, and actually existential temporality is really the stake here. Dasein, again, is where we're going to go here to begin to analyze what is time, right? And how is it distinct from temporality, etc. Right? So he's going to engage at, at multiple levels here. I mean, you could say, three levels, at least very generally speaking. So why or the way or the mode takes care of time. Why care, again, is very important to the, the structure of Dasein in everyday life, right? Because you're taking care of time. And then we go on to, world time. These are just stages. Let's just say stages. Second would be world time. So clock time is analyzed as is the time of the system, the solar system, in this one, right, is a reflection. And then finally, number 3 would be the common concept of time in the tradition of philosophy, and this is the one that begins with Aristotle. Right? So this is first formulated by Aristotle in the physics. I suggest once again, book 4 of the physics, chapter 10 is worth reading, carefully, right? And then the reflection of the time and spans in time. But this common concept, and Derrida calls it, and Heidegger does too, the Volcker concept of time. And this is where the beginning of footnote to section 82, right? The footnote to section 82 is located, of which Derrida wrote this very long piece called Note on a Note on Being in Time, in which he goes about how it's programmed through the Volcker concept of time. So these are the 3, if you will, stages of time and temporality. And remember, it's grounded in Dasein. Yeah. You're going to put on the thing, or should I?
It's already going.
Oh, it's on. It's on. Okay. I'm sorry about that. Okay.
No problem.
Okay. It's just the vocal, or it's no.
No, it's everything.
Oh, it's everything. Oh, I see it up there. I'm
Yeah, it's
sorry.
over there,
I see.
yeah.
Oh, good.
It was
good.
so
Okay.
annoying to have it in the middle.
Okay, I
Should've done that a
understand.
long
No
time
problem, Josh.
Can't
No
see
problem. That's
anybody.
good. That's
Yeah.
good. Yeah. Next year we're gonna get a twisting. We're gonna be
Yeah,
doing the
the ceiling.
circular.
A drone.
Yeah, drone.
Yeah, drone.
Hovering there.
Drone of maniacs. Yeah. Good. Okay. So this is the very, very general sketch. Again. But to give us kind of a ground to this in some ways, okay? So 78, as I said, is preliminary, basically asking the questions, what is the nature and the structure of time? Is human existence temporal? He'll go through this, and existential temporality. Section 79 is when you begin the circumspection, or the circumspective concern of time.
What does
Okay?
he mean by
No,
that?
go
I
ahead.
didn't get that, the circumspective, when he says that. Like just the,
Around the concern, there are 3 structures to it, modes, right? And this is a concernful time. Okay? 1 is awaiting, but not yet.
the ambush.
And usually predicated on the then. Then it will happen. We will meet again. I'm not on a roll today. All right. 2, of course, the notion of retaining. And he goes through these notions of retaining. And 3, the acting, the now, the happening now at this moment, right? Okay? So these are all the questions of, awaiting, retaining, and acting. Threefold structure. And as I mentioned last week, and, I spoke to Arto on the phone a little bit about this, behind this are two great works of Husserl, right? Edmund Husserl, his teacher and friend, and then someone he locked out of the department. Anyway, one is, of course, the logical investigations, which are in 6 parts, particularly book
6 parts.
book 6 of the, or 6 books, right? It's actually chapter 6 on expression and meaning. Very, very important chapter. Logical investigation number 6, let's call it, expression and meaning. In which the distinction is made between an expressive sign and an indicative sign, of which Derrida criticizes in a piece called Speech and Phenomena, or in a little book called The Voice and Phenomena in French, which is much better than just speech. In America, I don't get the translators sometimes. They really lose the force, because there's la voix, vox phenomena in French, and why would you translate voice as speech? Yeah, in some ways. So anyway, we can talk more about that later. The problems of translation, which we're always in to begin with, and especially with people like Heidegger and Derrida. And then the other book is, so that's one major influence. The other one, of course, is the phenomenology of internal emphasis, internal time consciousness. Again, Heidegger will substitute Dasein and temporality for time consciousness. He doesn't use the word consciousness or Bewusstsein, right? Yeah, but he'll use Zeit, of course, right? And Zeitlichkeit, etc. I'll wait till more people come next week to go through some of the German on this, the Zeitlichkeit and Temporalität, and some of the distinctions he's making. I think it's fair to the group in that sense to go back to that. But these are two major influences on on this work. One of the reasons he dedicates it in 1926 to Husserl. As you know, this is dedicated to Husserl before, and you remember this book was submitted for a job, to get his job, that of the Paul Natorp chair, and it was rejected. So give you an idea about the rigor, what was going on there. And Benjamin's thesis was at the origin of German tragic drama. So these are two great examples which were rejected as a thesis.
Wow.
And now they rubber stamp everybody. It's unbelievable, the machine at work. This text, not good enough. Can you imagine how these people must feel after this? Right. So anyway, all right. So again, so the circumspective concern, very important, circumspection. Again, a term of spatiality that becomes almost temporality, right? The circumspection, right? The looking around, and very interesting that it's circular, right? The then, the retaining, and the acting. And to go to, Sherman's subtitle of his book, Being and Acting, he really is talking about acting now and time. And that's the politics. The politics may be in this, these 3 modes, that I mentioned earlier. So these are the stages, and then we have the 3, the awaiting. Here's your Beckett in some ways, waiting for Godot, in many ways. Why, sometimes in the earlier literature in the 1950s, around the time of the theater of the absurd, Heidegger was very prevalent in terms of this waiting, this awaiting, right? And of course, the not yet. And Beckett always said it's not Godot who we're worried about. We're worried about the waiting. Beckett always emphasized the waiting in waiting on Godot. It's really on attendant, right? On the waiting, on the attention of the waiting in the French, right? In a sense, right? So the awaiting, and then there's the retention, right? Or the retaining, to keep it in participial form. The retaining, right? And this is all part of the concerned circumvention. And then, of course, the acting. And then you can ask the question of, the politics. I mean, isn't the politics kind of all three? When you really begin to think about that, acting in the world, acting in the now, right? Is being and acting. Rainer Schumann, for example, who tries to develop a kind of open politics, an anarchia, anarchia meaning that without principle, that you don't have a dogmatic principle
first
on which
philosophy, he says.
first philosophies, right?
Which is what Marx did.
Yes, yes, right. So you don't want to do that. So the anarchy is working here, right? Without principle. Well, arche means beginning. It also means principle, and it also means commandment. So you have three different words in one in the arche. Yeah. When you say anarche, you're saying without commandment, without obedience, without principle. Okay? And without beginning, in a sense. So you're not looking for beginnings here, You're kind of going with the structure, if you will, of the taking care of time.
Is it closer to his word of moment?
Moment is, I think the best translation for that's another problem in translation. I really like this room because it can work well. I don't have to get those stupid things. I'm sorry. Augenblick is the moment of something. Now, when we talk about the Augenblick is the twinkling in an eye, or the moment of kind of vision, right, that gives you great insight or something like that. Kind of being struck by lightning, and then the twinkling of the eye happens, and something like that. So he's looking at this. This is a play of light here. The Blick, right? Augenblick. So this is the moment, and then the moments of the glimpses, if you will, into the moments of authenticity. Very good on this is the use of silhouette, a literary example of this. And I'm sorry, I mean, I'm giving these references because I think they help really explicate this better. Explicate in the strong sect of unfolding the folds. Of course, the ply is the fold, right? You implicate as you fold in, and to explicate is to fold out. But anyway, for explicative reasons, Maurice Blanchot's notion of the silhouette in Thomas the Obscure, I think is the name of the book he does. He has several novellas in which this plays out. The Madness of the Day is another kind of Heideggerian thing. And this was a very well-known, have any of you read Maurice Blanchot or no? Okay. Very, very interesting French writer. Maurice Blanchot, Madness of the Day. His great essay, long essay book, The Infinite Conversation. Very beautifully written, beautiful writer. Right? The Death Sentence.
I've heard of that.
Yes, another great one of his. So he is kind of engaging in this, the very, very interesting explication of this notion of what you just brought up, Nori, the Augenblick, the moment. So a lot of people have started to translate Augenblick not as the blink of an eye, or the authentic blink of an eye, the twinkling of the eye, right? But as a moment, So you get into a historical sense here too. You can maybe historicize this when we get to world time, and then we go next week to, Heidegger's notion of time and history, historicity, right? This is very radical. The more I read this, the more I get away from all the Nazi thing. David, I forgot your book, but I can run home and get it today.
No, that they-
Yeah, I'm sorry. I keep forgetting it. I have it right on the desk, but it's behind, you know, yeah, I should have put it out today. But I know exactly
You
what
sure
it
you're
is.
not going through it?
Every night,
Every night.
every night. I'm trying to relive the rant.
Right, it's exciting times.
Yeah. But the more I think about this, the more, you know, fodder we have, you know, for the future, the not yet in some ways. You know, we don't have to follow the whole militaristic stuff, but there are some many very interesting, you know, concepts here, especially his thinking about time. Yeah. Thinking about time. So anyway, so remember here, this is circumspect concern, right? Time as concern, right? Or taking, hi Chris, how you doing?
Okay.
There's room up here if you want.
Okay.
Wherever you like, yeah, or by Josh. Rachel's not gonna come until later, so. Yeah. Sometimes it's good in relationships to be on the opposite side of the table.
Where you wanna
The
put
train
that
went
side?
local.
Okay, it did, okay.
How about
I have
this?
something
local.
New
for-
York subway
You want the
system
chair?
apparently
Are
is
you gonna
the
sit
worst
there?
in the world.
Oh, it
in all
is, by
major
far,
cities. Yeah,
by far, oh yeah.
They released a
No, it's
report, it's
finished
the
here,
last,
finished.
worse than Indonesia.
This
you
is
know,
why we're doing
Jakarta.
Heidegger, it's finished here, I'm telling you.
I usually come early because I expect it to be late. You
Right.
can ask Sean, I'm
Right.
always here half hour, 40 minutes early. Then when I say,
Right.
all right, it's not gonna come
Okay.
So you're working on
early.
the Q train?
So-
The Q is going on the R line,
Oh.
and then it's stalled under the.
Yeah, always different things, yeah. You can get rid of that, big- you like the big chair?
Don't you like the big chair better?
You like the big chair better for you, Chris?
Chris, take the
I
picture.
guess so.
Take the big chair.
I have something for you.
Oh, thank you very much, okay. Oh, yes, thank you very much, I'm gonna take a look at this, yeah. I'll bring David's back and then I'll hold this one.
Revolving library.
These are his lectures, huh? This is on being in history. Well, this is for next week then, in some ways. Okay, I'll take a strong look at this, okay. Peggy Vermouth, Jeff Pennington, Mark Chris Hall. Okay.
Spivak is not.
Shaking his head.
Not involved in
What's our talk?
translation.
What's that?
What's our talk
We didn't know. We heard Glick.
Yeah.
Oh.
No,
You cited
yeah,
me
yeah.
at the beginning. I want to thank Michael Pelias for turning me on to
Been here,
the
been here,
relationship
okay.
of philosophy to Mike
Sit here,
Tyson.
there's no camera.
That's how I began. You know, I used to tell him Tyson had Schopenhauer on his.
He's been reading philosophy.
Reading
Said
a
in
lot
the
of
film.
philosophy. Yeah. I'm glad he told me about this. I got into Mike Tyson. He goes on, you know. Jeremy watched the Tyson film by Tobin.
great film.
About 10 times. Yeah.
He cites Nietzsche in there.
Oh yes, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did
His tiny
anybody
voice,
find
you
a
know.
notebook?
A
I think
notebook.
no.
A notebook here, you mean,
Yeah.
last week?
Oh, they use this room during the week, so I don't know. where
Yeah,
they put it.
yeah, down.
Check over there.
Yeah, you left a notebook here? With Heidegger stuff, or?
With a whole lot of notes and
Oh,
things.
God, okay. I don't know, Chris. I don't know, I can go by the secretary this week and ask them if someone's heard that. You know, you never know around here.
Huh. On my phone.
I'm sorry,
Oh, okay.
I'm just total,
No, they're here during the week, so somebody might have picked it up.
put it.
It's in good coat.
All right, so, okay, so let's take a look at 79 for a second and just see what he's doing. He's very complete as usual about this. I know it's, you know, a lot of overload, but let's take a look at it. Dasein exists, this is page 382nd, right? And he talks about, I'm going to begin with time taken care of and within timeness at the top of 387, section 80, within timeness and the genesis of the vulgar concept of time, one of the stages here about Aristotle. that I put up. A comparison of the existential and ontological connection of temporality, Dasein, and world-time with Hegel's interpretation of the relationship of time and spirit. And this is, Heidegger is very close to Hegel, by the way. I mean, there's been some stuff written about this, obviously, that Heidegger's notion of time is sometimes very close to Geist and world historical Geist.
When I mentioned it last week that Derrida mentions it, Hegel a lot in the first lecture, you said that's strange.
Well, I mean, in the first lecture of on Heidegger, you mean?
Yeah.
On his lectures here on Heidegger? In what context did he mention Hegel?
Well, I don't-
Because Hegel does not come up until very late in this. I'm gonna take a look, yeah.
Okay.
No, it's
You'll
good, it's a
see.
good question, yeah.
I didn't read the
Yeah,
whole
good thought.
book.
Yeah. Well, first of all, he's gonna take ontology and keep the question of being. He wants to destroy the notion of ontology, Derrida, and say that the destruction itself is, more about being than about the ontology. Okay. It's Hegel's logic that he's using here, yeah. I see where he's going. I mean, by just scanning it, yeah.
That's a great work.
What's that?
The logic, the great
Oh,
logic.
yeah, of course. Okay, I'll just read you Derrida since Chris brought it up, and I mean, this is probably interesting to us. Why is Hegel's enterprise, so close for that matter to Heidegger, still enclosed in the circle of classical ontology? This is a question that will not leave us in peace throughout these reflections, but already the reply has peeped through in the two passages I have read, and he's reading from Being in Time, the footnote again, which he then expands into this note on a note. Okay? I've just read the passage on the prejudice one could call conceptualist, the prejudice that makes a being a concept, or the thought of being a concept. And remember, Heidegger always says being is not a concept. Right? So, anyway, and the passage on the eschatology of being in his work on Anaximander Sane, which is another thing in a book called, what's the title? Early Greek Thinking, that's in English, Heidegger, the Anaximander fragment. The last sentence, which I read again, the phenomenology itself represents a phase, but only a phase, in other words, that access to absolute knowledge in the phenomenology of spirit, where spirit is finally gathered into itself, this kind of circle of absolute knowing that Hegel does through these spherical unfoldings of the dialectic. Remember, the Hegelian dialectic is very spiral. You unfold to the next level of these spheres. This is what's going on, and this, of course, spawned a whole tradition of Marxism. Including Kojève, and many Hegelian Marxists. And some parts of the Frankfurt School, not all. Anyway. Insomuch, this is why I say it's only a phase. Being gathers itself in the extremity of its essence, hitherto struck by the seal of metaphysics as the absolute subjectivity of the unconditioned will to will. Okay, so he's going to go on about subjectivity here. Let's go through. I'll read this over this first lecture seriously and carefully, and maybe I'll give something where he's going here in these lectures. This is Derrida at age, I don't know exactly when this was, the lecture, let's see here.
50s maybe.
No, 60, let me just see here. He gave sessions at the Sorbonne from 1960 until 64, ending with History and Truth. He did a thing on the fifth Cartesian meditation of Husserl. The Heidegger, though, let's see. This may be 65. Yeah, I think it's 65. Yeah, 65. 64, 65, there were 9 sessions. And then speaking of logical investigations, he gave 12 sessions on the theory of meaning in the logical investigations and ideas towards a pure phenomenology. So to my mind, Derrida never gave up, being a phenomenologist. He started there, he ended there, even though deconstruction was a method and he was, expert and it became associated with him, I think he stayed there. Okay, so then he gave lectures at Johns Hopkins, Literature and Truth, on the concept of mimesis, writing in theory and theater, Mallarmé and Artaud, right? Antoine Artaud. And then he did a whole thing again, Johns Hopkins on literature and psychoanalysis in the text. So you can see the early days at Johns Hopkins University. He would go back from Hopkins to thing. And then he started to go to Yale, in the middle 70s. That was the beginning of the Yale School of Diet. But it really was at Johns Hopkins that he was, doing the early work. So anyway, I'll read it seriously and see. I think Hegel is a foil for Heidegger in some ways. There are comparisons, certainly between time and spirit, but for Heidegger, time is more than just Geist unfolding, right? And world historical time that way. I think and we'll talk more about that. And also a very different kind of notion of how time operates, because Hegelian time is an unfolding of time in these spherical dialectical relations. They're kind of circular, spirals in which time is unfolding in this sense. And also the time of the now for Heidegger is still part of the vulgar conception of time. This whole history runs from Aristotle to Hegel. But we'll get into this a little more. Let's see where he's first going, because again, Heidegger, as this philosopher, systematic philosopher, is preparing us to get there, to this section, this crucial section 82, of where Derrida is going to begin. Okay? All right. So good. All right. So let's go back to here. Okay. So the existential temporal analytic of Dasein and the fundamental ontological question, where we began today with Sean reading about he did not finish this work. We're just getting started, right? Right? Okay. So Dasein exists, 79, as a being that in its being is concerned, and concerned is very about that being itself. Essentially, ahead of itself, it has projected itself upon its potentiality of being before going on to any mere consideration of itself. So this projection is happening before the taking care of or being concerned with, if you will. In its project, it is revealed as something thrown. He's recapitulating what we did last week and have done, somewhat diagrammatically. Thrown, and this is, everybody has abandonment fears, but this is what we are. We're thrown and abandoned in the world. This is a thing that should be embraced instead of being so scared of, in a way. I think this is a very good starting point in the therapeutic endeavor or enterprise, that one begins to talk about thrownness and abandonment as a positive, right? How does one embrace it? How does one encounter it, rather than it's just a complex or something that we're so frightened of, and et cetera. It's good to maybe examine the fear. One of the reasons you're in the therapeutic encounter, but on the other hand, to take up this abandonment as something positive, in a way. Yeah, okay. I'm not saying going around and saying I'm abandoned by everything, that's not the idea. Just understanding that thrownness and abandonment. Jaspers used the phrase, we're all shipwrecked. That was his metaphor, we're shipwrecked. We're all shipwrecked. Right? So anyway, yeah. All right, so thrown and abandoned in the world, it falls prey to it in taking care of it. As care, that is existing in the unity of the entanglement, right? And we talked about this last week. Thrown project, this being is disclosed as there. And again, the importance of the da. Da. Not in the Russian sense, but da, right? In the German sense, of the there-ness. The spatial, right, and temporal location in terms of there. or the there now, if you want us to talk about it in these kind of terms, right? Being together with others, it keeps itself in an average interpretedness that is articulated in discourse and expressed in language. Being in the world has already expressed itself, and as being together with beings encountered within the world, it constantly expresses itself in addressing and talking over what is taken care of, what's been taken care of. You know, we talk in terms of agendas, right? You know, Heidegger's talking about what is being taken care of. The circumspect taking care of common sense is grounded in temporality, in the mode of making present, and I put on the board, that both awaits and retains. As taking care and calculating, planning, preparing ahead and preventing, it always already says, whether audibly or not, then, right? So we now get the temporal terms, such as the then, right? And we're gonna get this during, throughout, meanwhile, lasting. He'll go through everything. I don't know if you remember this, but he's very good at covering all the terms that we use temporally. Meanwhile, during, throughout, the lasting, you know, all of this is included in this, right? Okay? Whether audibly or not, that will happen before, that will get settled now, that will be made up for that which on that former occasion failed or eluded us. So, in the then, right? So here we go, the temporality of awaiting. In the then, we are then waiting for Godot, right? What is it, DD and who's the other character? Didai and Estragon. Valdemir and Estragon, right? And you know, and Lucky and Pazzo.
Lucky and Pazzo.
Right, good.
He gets
Okay.
beaten and he's
Yes, he
called
does,
Lucky.
he gets beat, Lucky. We have to tell Peter that about his dog. His dog is named Lucky. I have to tell Nathalie this story.
That's gonna get
I
beat.
upset the apple cart a little bit there, you know. All right. Taking care, you know, every day it's about the dog's health when I call.
It's too much.
It's
I
too
have
much.
to wait at the time.
It's too much. Okay. Losing his radicality. I'm gonna bring that up. What about the dog? What about Lucky? Right, anyway, in the then, taking care, and this is important, expresses itself in awaiting, retaining, in the on that former occasion, and making present in the now. In the then, for the most part, inexplicitly, lies the now, not yet. Okay? Think of revolution, think of Ernst Bloch in this case. I don't know how many of you read Ernst Bloch, but the principle of hope is really Ernst Bloch's revolutionary treatise, 3 volumes.
Of course.
Right?
The Germans. 3 volumes.
Yeah, in which, you know, the not yet is always important. That's where the revolution is going to occur, and the not yet, right?
Was he Frankfurt School?
No, got in arguments
Okay.
anytime. He, Lukács, and Adorno had big arguments about expressionism in Germany, and Bloch and Adorno continued in an antagonistic relationship about music and other things, you know, in a way. But another great, you know, and he uses terms very much like Heidegger: tradition, heritage. I don't know if you got to some of these terms, but you begin to see Heidegger at work in terms of the tradition. And remember, again, another task here is to destroy and rewrite the history of ontology. That's why I'm kind of amazed about being here, because one task of Heidegger is rewriting the history of ontology. Yeah. So I'm going to look at this carefully, but I want to see what he does, you know. Yeah. 60. So, all right, good. All right, so it retains and is spoken in a making present that awaitingly both retains and forgets, right? So he's looking at retention and protension here as well, memory and perception. You know, you guys know that in Husserlian terminology, you know, in Husserl, the protension is basically our perspective, and the retention is our memory. So we have a protentive tension and a retention. And this can be primary and secondary memory, and this is perception. So when Merleau-Ponty writes his first major volume of philosophy, The Phenomenology of Perception. He's going to engage this and this structure, the protentive structure, in terms of our internal time consciousness. So this is very sophisticated stuff. Unfortunately, the American schools in philosophy do not, work with this and any kind of sustained thing. You get a course here and there, but it's never sustained, right? And so yeah. And remember, phenomenology is a movement. It's not a set of principles, a dogma, right? In a way, it is a movement in philosophy that is trying to get to the level of the experiential, right? Which, yeah, always getting to the level there, right? So, and Merleau-Ponty also writes a little short treatise after the Phenomenology of Perception, which is actually an argument against behaviorism, for those of you, and I understand David can correct me on this or elucidate more, is that a lot of the therapy today, that behaviorism has made a major comeback, and that they're kind of looking at this as a unifying kind of psychology to use today, right?
Well,
And
yeah, cognitive is.
cognitive behaviorism.
Behavioral
Yes,
is
yes, right.
basically, in the mode, and it's easy for insurance companies to understand, and it's time limited, and it's cost effective.
Calculable.
And it doesn't really work, so.
Yes, and it doesn't work, of course.
Even more importantly, it doesn't work.
Puts more opioid, so the more kid, right?
Right.
Doesn't work, the
But
cognitive
who cares,
behavior.
it's cheaper.
It's cheaper, yeah.
Yes, exactly.
And,
Right.
measurable and
Right.
quantifiable
Yes,
and
good.
everything else.
Yeah. So, but it's interesting that Merleau-Ponty begins his treatise, The Phenomenology of Perception, which is his being and nothingness. I mean, there are two major works in French philosophy, during the war and post-World War II. One is, of course, Sartre's Being and Nothingness, in which he's trying to flesh out Heidegger's, Mitsein, being with others, especially the concrete relations with others, in which Sartre, at the end of that text, proposes at least some elements towards an existential psychoanalysis. And in one way, I read Being and Nothingness at one level, an all-out attack against French psychoanalysis, not Lacan so much, but the French psychoanalysis of that period, right, which is very reductionistic and deterministic. And at a second level, it's an opening to bring in the question of free will again, and freedom as a massive, fearful moment in one's psyche that we shirk from, right? That the Freudian, problematic never really had. So he's bringing that in, into this, in the existential cycle. Now, the other great book is The Phenomenology of Perception by Merleau-Ponty, in which begins as an attack on behaviorism.
Sartre said, hell is other people.
Yes, he did, and no exit. He put it in a character's mouth.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, you think that he doesn't
Garcin,
believe
right,
that?
was his name. I think he believed that because in concrete relations with other, he defined love as two hypnotists going at each other. He never really had a broader definition of love. And, love and concrete relations with others were usually on the level of sadomasochistic operations. It was subject, object at work. I mean, he's a very honest observer of human nature. He didn't believe in human nature. He's always looking at consciousness and intentionality. And I mean, I know you're the only woman in the room today, at least at this time of day. Anyway, he also talked about, the bad faith of the woman that you're in the taxi cab with. He has examples like this. And you put your hand on her thigh, and she acts like nothing's happening, right? And then you start, getting close. He goes through these kind of, machinations about the bad faith of not just saying no or saying please continue or something like that. So he has a whole elaborate thing.
Maybe no.
Poor Simone is right. Well, she got him back. She
Maybe
wrote
the no comes
she
10
wrote
years
I do.
later.
Yeah, what's that?
Maybe the no comes 10 years later on Twitter.
Yes, always on Twitter. Me too.
Repetition?
Yeah, repetition.
Difference.
Bullshit. But he actually, but it's interesting the way he does this, because he's talking about consciousness and intentionality. You know, I'm not saying, you know, that this is right, or I'm not really trying to make value judgments. I'm kind of just describing, he's really doing a descriptive phenomenology of the gesture, the act, you know, and maybe what intentionality is in a certain way, you know, and this is interesting, that he's not bringing no moral judgments or ethical judgments into it. He's trying to look at this as a structure of what he calls his version of inauthenticity is mauvaise foi, you know, bad faith, you know, yeah. So, you know, this is a, you know, yeah.
And he thinks that it's mostly women that.
No,
have that.
he didn't say that. I mean, you know, I mean, in a way, yeah, no, he did. No, he never said that. Mostly women. He uses that example. He also uses the example of the waiter in the cafe. And you know, his male characters, especially in No Exit, since you brought it up, Hell is Other People, is that the male cannot get himself out of the trap of the lesbian and her lover. I mean, No Exit is really about this, that he can't choose to leave. You know, he's trapped within in this moment of consciousness. So in some ways, his male characters, except Orestes in The Condemned of Altona, who says, I am my freedom. You know, Nausea, at the end of Nausea, Roquentin, who is a play on Quentin Thompson, in case you guys didn't know. You know, he was reading Faulkner very actively. Quentin Thompson's Antoine Roquentin is a play on Quentin Thompson, the main character of The Sound and Fury, in my opinion. You know, or not really. I mean, I think Jason is actually the main character, but that's another story. We can talk about that when we do the philosophy of markets and stuff like that. But anyway, so yeah, I mean, you know, you see it in his male characters and the way he constitutes Genet and the existential psychoanalytic, Mallarmé's politics, Baudelaire. So Sartre is not really in that way. I don't really think you can say from the standpoint of descriptive phenomenology. I'm not so sure he's sexist. You know, if you want to go there. I mean, you know, in a way. However, in terms of the relationship, you know, and the relationship they had, that they made when they were students, you know, was to have a lifelong pact of freedoms.
You mean Simone?
Simone de Beauvoir, yeah, that relationship to go
But they
back
got
to.
very mad at each other when one person's had an affair with
Well,
another.
you know, I don't know how mad,
Not
because
mad.
Algren, who she loved, I mean, she never met a character like Nelson Algren, you know, tough, you know, Chicago. She loved him. She loved Algren. She never saw anything like this. He'd take her to these bars and stuff that Sartre, you know, just fantasized about in some ways, right? And anyway, you know, Algren said about Sartre, he was, you know, unlike all the other Frenchies of his generation, he stood way above all of them. He was eminently more intelligent, etc. So they would have coffee together. You know, this was it, you know. And I mean, you know, and Sartre didn't really especially like, you know, copulation. He liked foreplay. So this is another thing too, you know. So, you know, so you can make what you will out of all this. I mean, you know, in a sense. But she got him back really well in terms of her own descriptive phenomenology of his breakdown in a book, I Do. It's her last work, saying goodbye to him in the 70s.
What book?
I Do. To God, you know, goodbye. Yeah. She, I
Was
mean,
he still alive?
she was when she was writing it. Yeah, she's taking notes on his illnesses, right? As a rigorous phenomenologist, he left no holds barred. You know, how he would spill the drink all over himself, how he would, you know, yeah, all kinds of things. Yeah, it's yeah. Very descriptive. So it's not like she's an innocent in all of this either, you know, in some ways. Yeah. And they maintain this. Think about this too. You know, I mean, they maintain that kind of, you know, I mean, I don't know if honesty is the right word, but these pact of freedoms, if you will, from 1928 or 9 until the end of his life was with 1980, and I think she died 87, 88. You know, she was in the class with Merleau-Ponty and Lévi-Strauss. He was earlier. They were all in the same, Braudel, all these people. You know, Sartre was in the class with the Bourbaki mathematicians too, Henri Weil, Jean Didonné, all these people were there. I have a nice photograph of all that. I'm gonna try to get it blown up, you know, because I love that photograph. You know, you have the entire French intelligentsia in one class, so the mathematicians, the philosophers, the literary people, not everybody, obviously. There's another great photograph of Lacan with Picasso, Sartre, Michel Eddy, very wonderful. Simone was there, yeah. In fact, usually she was photographed as the only woman in the photograph too. Yeah. So anyway, you know, listen, he in some ways, I think one of the reasons he's not read actively, you know, this is a kind of defense of him, because there's a lot of thinking that's going on in Sartre, is because, you know, the feminists have said, you know, no good, you know, passé, you know, exactly.
But they haven't
It's on the
substituted
blacklist.
anything of the same
There's
substance.
a scene in Monty Python, did you ever see the
Maybe
Sartre?
not, maybe not. no.
There's two women in a laundromat, and they're obviously lower class British women. And
He didn't like the British
dressed-
woman.
It's men
Oh, it's men.
dressed as
That's
women.
Oh, that's good.
And they,
Okay.
you know, they talk like that. And they're having an argument about Sartre in
Okay,
a laundromat.
okay, that's good.
And they're saying, no, he didn't mean that. And the other one is saying, no, I saw it, and that's what he means.
Right.
They decide to go to Paris and ask him.
Oh, yeah?
And he's busy.
He's busy?
So they said, let's talk to Simone. Maybe she knows what he meant. But it's hilarious.
Right,
That's,
right.
yeah, I think I've
right,
seen that.
interesting, yeah, well, I mean, you know, there are people that write, that she was a more sophisticated philosopher. I'm not so sure about that, and how do you measure that in terms of that relationship? She read a lot of the manuscripts. She obviously edited it. You know, he was a writing machine. You know, I don't know if Tito Gerasi saw this, but Wilfred Dazan told me that when he went to Sartre's apartment, he would peek over the manuscript, and he said, all Sartre does is write, he never edits,
Yeah.
you know? And this was really what
Chain-smoking
happened,
and
you know,
writing.
chain smoking and writing, and it was always this thing. And this is what Husserl would do, and I think I told you the story about Aaron Gervich, who used to be at the New School, who was part of that tradition, and a good friend of Merleau-Ponty's, hated Heidegger. Anyway, I had to get that in. He would work like this, you know, he'd just put pages like this on the floor, and he'd have stacks like this, because they were coming out of this whole, you know, eidetic reduction of Husserl, which was the relationship and the tension between the protension and the retention, between perception and memory, and all the things that are going on
Was
in
he
this thing,
also
in terms
on
of the,
amphetamines?
later on. I see you know a lot about him.
Who, Sartre?
Yeah, Ritalin.
Really?
Yeah, Ritalin and booze together. He took mescaline during the period he's writing the Imagination. Yeah,
Who was this?
sorry.
Sartre was on,
Took mescaline.
amphetamines.
They took amphetamine. He wrote part of the Critique of Dialectical Reason on amphetamines.
Huh.
And so Paul, of course, says, I can't read this because to do it phenomenologically justice to it, I'd have to be on amphetamines while I'm reading it. This is what he said about the Critique of Dialectical Reason.
How come
You know, in order to be phenomenologically pure, you know, I would have to read it. So these are all interesting anecdotes that kind of play into the richness of experience these people had, yeah. But Sartre, you know, the book, The Psychology of Imagination, L'Imaginaire, which was very influential on Sartre, on Lacan, and also on Roland Barthes. In fact, Roland Barthes dedicates Camera Lucida to Sartre, I think, and
Which book?
the later book, Camera Lucida. Yeah. You know, his book of photographs and those wonderful photos of his mother, right? You know, and yeah. Anyway, yeah, the imagination, the psychology of imagination, transcendence of the ego, which was a criticism after Levi-Strauss. Let me just do this. You know, I mean, look, it's so vast, you know, and so much to cover. But just so you know, it's okay. There's a tradition that goes on after, you know, this, which is the turn of the century. Nietzsche dies, Freud writes Interpretation of the Dreams. He's written it in 1899, but he waits till 1900, turn of the century, to publish it, right? Logical Investigations is coming out then. Of course, you know, it's the beginning of the new century. And simultaneously, we also, Nietzsche dies, right? In 1900, yeah. Nietzsche's 1844 till 1900. Dies mad, of course. You know, he's mad for the last 10.5 years of his life. So anyway, after this comes out, and after phenomenology becomes very active, there's some French people, especially the generation that's being educated in the 1920s, in particular Raymond Ohrel, who became a very well-known sociologist and a very good friend of Foucault. Raymond Ohrel, who was one of the followers of Arendt, thinking that Stalinist Russia or Stalinist Soviet Union was also totalitarian like Hitler's, you know, Germany, which to me is a very misfounded, working premise. But anyway, that's another story. Braud went to Germany to work with Husserl and learn phenomenology. So he comes back to Paris and he sees Sartre in a cafe, and they know each other from school. And he starts talking to him about phenomenology, and he says, you see that cocktail on the table? You can talk about this in phenomenology. You can describe what it is. You can use this as an object of perception, and you can, you know, do this. So Sartre says, I have to run to, to Germany and become a student of Husserl's. So they do this. The first critique of Husserl in terms of the, and I have this up here, Wesen, the unfolding of intuition, intuitive unfolding, or the intuition of essences, Wesensschau, and Wesensschauen as an activity, intuiting essences of things. You know, what is the essence of your sweater? What is the essence of the Pepsi bottle or whatever the soft drink is there, etc. The Wesensschauen is critiqued by Emmanuel Levinas in a book called Husserl's Theory of Intuition. This is published 1932. Well before Adorno and the Frankfurt School started to get into against epistemology, jargon of authenticity, and all this stuff. So you have this tradition in France, right, among the French intellectuals, and I think Levinas, if I'm not mistaken, is a Romanian Jew. I think he's a Romanian, Anyway, Levinas, is the first to do the critique of phenomenology on the intuition of essences. Sartre goes further and he writes, so you have Levinas is the first critique in France, Emmanuel Levinas, on Husserl's, and this is available in English, and as is Sartre, the transcendence of the ego. The transcendence of the ego is an attempt to look at the egological realm of Husserl. Because every time you're doing a reduction in terms of the subject to the object, or in the protension, retention moments, right, in phenomenology, you are constituting something differently, right? You're doing what's called the epoche, right? Right? A suspension and placing all your prejudices towards the object into abeyance. Right? This is what epoche means. It's from a Stoic word, which really meant to, put things aside, right? Leaving something aside. So, So the epoche is putting things into abeyance, releasing all your prejudices in terms of the natural way you see, right? Because you're not really seen according to Husserl and that thing. You have to think about position, what's being constituted as an object, and this becomes the structure that you're always looking at, what the perception is gathering, right, alongside of what is being remembered. So this whole thing here of retention, when he uses this, retaining, as one of the circumspect methods, is coming directly out of Husserl. And it's very, very important. You're not only awaiting the not yet in the protentive, temporal sequence, you're also at the same time retaining something. This is the part of the memory, or what we call the politics of memory in some ways, or what Stiegler would call, in my opinion, the anonemic, in some ways, the recollection, which is more substantial, right? Versus the hyponeta, which is the external memory, right? So this is what's going on, in terms of this relationship. I mean, I hope I'm doing okay with this with you guys. This is the relationship going back to the Husserlian notion of let us get to the essence of things, right? The things themselves. Remember, I've used that as the battle cry earlier in the semester. This is the battle cry of the phenomenologist. Get to the things themselves. Back to the phenomena themselves. But the things themselves is important. The things in this case, right? Remember the ready to hand and the present to hand. Not the objective things, but the things that are ready to hand. Not the present to hand, right? Because that's what science does. That's what they do with Stanley. And Stanley, by the way, went home Monday. He's a little better, but he's weak. But anyway, they do that. I watch this at the medical, the medical profession, the positivism that's at work all the time. So anyway, I hope you see, look, this is very, very dense, and there are many, many areas that you can begin to work with, and etc. I mean, the main thing though to take as we go forward in terms of these conceptions of time, the taking care of time, right, is this first thing, and it is through, again, Dasein, the there-ness of our being, that is the starting point. This is why you spend so much time on the existential analytic. The first part of the book that we've spent time on, the 44 chapters and even further, the existential analytic, is a preparation, if you will. It's a propedeutic to this notion of time and temporality that he's going to do. It is only through us that we have these structures of awaiting Godot. If the emphasis is on the awaiting or on the waiting for, the en attendant, right? In the French is even stronger. Emphasis is on the waiting. Forget Godot. Forget God. It's the waiting that's the important part, right here, right? Waiting for God, Simone Weil. Andre Weil's, a beautiful writer and one of the most intelligent. You talk about an intelligent, metaphysician and thinker in the 20th century. Amazing.
She said the man who is proud of his intelligence is like the prisoner, proud of his cell.
Well, our brother was pretty damn smart. Andre Weil was the head of the Bourbaki Mathematics Secret Society.
Really?
Yes. I've had one of the nice photographs of him with her, too.
She refused to eat more than the rations allowed in the death.
No, she went to work in the factory to see what it was like.
But she wouldn't
She
eat.
died, because of that.
She died of starvation.
Starvation, yeah.
Because she wouldn't eat more than the prisoners in
ration.
the camps
Right,
were
right.
allowed.
Yeah. This was a major thinker, someone that's not read among the left, but very important. Gravity and Grace, Waiting on God, her notebooks. Her notebooks are amazing in terms of, the density of her thing. Her teacher was Alain.
Who?
Alain was his name, yeah. The French philosopher, turn of the century, as big a name as Bergson in French philosophy at the turn of the century. So she had very, very good pedigree. Etc. Extremely good. Very accomplished family. Like I said, her brother was the head of the secret society of mathematicians, known as the Bourbaki group. I'll put that on the board. They're an important group. It's a secret society of mathematicians. This was the code name that they took from some general in the French, Nicholas Bourbaki, and then a Greek family, the Bourbakis, who descend from this wealthy family in the north, got upset. They're using our name. But when they found out what it was for, they dropped all the lawsuits. When they found out, what a powerful group of intellectuals, the secret society of mathematicians. What they did is they changed the teaching of algebra, basically, in the entire French mathematical system. and they put out multiple treatises of books. They rewrote the textbooks. They couldn't stand the way mathematics was being taught. So they set upon themselves to rewrite the entire history of the teaching of mathematics in France. Pretty amazing group. You know, I mean, this is the real deal in a way, you know, going back. And set theory, they came from Cantor. They were very, very immersed with Cantor's set of sets and set theory, which is important, as you know, to Alain Badiou's mathematical ontology. Yeah. So anyway. So good. Well, just to go back to this again. So all this unfolding of essences, this the battle cry into the things themselves, right? The Zelps, yeah, themselves, to the things themselves, right? The Freudian battle cry, as you know, where it was, I shall become. Where it was, ego shall be, was the normal translation. I think it's much more powerful where it was, wo es was, ich werden, I shall become, right? This was Freud, right? In a way, yeah? Where it was, I shall become. I shall put myself there, go down all the way and see it. So, you know, so unlike Husserl, Freud, of course, had the theory of the unconscious, which he borrowed. I think it was von Hartmann. Edward von Hartmann was the first to, I think, conceptualize a notion of the unconscious. And Freud took it up in a much more radical way in terms of the topography of the mind. But for Husserl, this is all about consciousness. For Heidegger, the substitute for consciousness is the there, the being. So just to give you a sense of this, right, that how this is working through these giants of thinking, right? Marx used being, he used Dasein as existence. Dasein usually meant existence in the translation, and this was something else. And you see Heidegger, remember last week we talked about alienation and falling prey. You see this in Heidegger, he's going to use this term too. Alienation is first, at least to my knowledge, you know, and I've researched this somewhat. Grotius, the thinker of war and peace, the first international relationist, was the first to use alienation, and then Rousseau used it in the social contract. And then, of course, it takes on a completely different meaning in Marx. But in the law, it means without lien. You have no property, you have no lien to the property. So, a man like Mitchell Franklin, who writes on alienation, who's a philosophy of Marxist philosopher of law, never read either. You know, I'm going to give a presentation on Franklin. I think I'm going to do that soon. You know, on his work on the Constitution, his works in Marxist legal theory. He was a law professor. I'm sorry to divert, but anyways, he was a law professor at Tulane University, one of the great experts on Roman law and French law. Mitchell Franklin. And I knew that he actually taught one of my uncles. He was there for a very long time. Right? Yeah. I think from the 1940s onward, you know, and yeah. Very, very smart man. Very, very smart legal theorist. And he talks about the Constitution, the dialectics of the U.S. Constitution is the work he works on, the dialectics. And he talks about three constitutions, of course. The white man's, he doesn't use that phrase, I'm using that phrase. You know, the first constitution, the second, of course, being the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendments, and then the third constitution is the court of public opinion. Yeah, he's very good at this, very, very smart, yeah. So anyway, I know I'm diverting, but this is interesting, this, again, Heideggerian, Lacanian, Freudian notion of how important language is, of course, the Derridian, you know, how we've been accustomed to this. We really want to look at these semantic fields, where a word appears, how it's used in context, etc., and how we can do a materiality of the text. This, to me, is the deconstructive moment. It's also the moment of say, the Heideggerian enterprise as well. Where's this material etymology? How are we going to get there? You know, and again, for Heidegger, we're talking about this interiorization of the New German, the Lutheran German, right, in the ancient Greek, and then somehow it's corrupted by Plato and Aristotle, and we need to get back to the direct intuition of the Greeks, right, through the pre-Socratics. So the direct intuition fits very much with this Wesenschauen. You know, how are we going to intuit essences that we do through a release of our prejudices of logical thinking, systematic thinking, etc., and we begin to see in terms of the intuitive. And this is a part of, if you look at Deleuze and Guattari carefully, the Anti-Oedipus is a work really of this, of intuition, you know, and practical reason. That's where they're going, right? They're trying to stay away from structuralism and structures, right, in this sense. So this is kind of interesting when you begin to think this through. So in 1962, a Heidegger will be much closer to the pre-Socratics when he talks about time and being than he is in 1927, because he's still borrowing heavily these concepts. What I'd like you to see here is that Husserl is developing a philosophy of consciousness. Consciousness is always intentionality. The word of, to go to Derrida, de la grammatologie, of grammatology, right? Consciousness of the study of the grammaire, of the written and the grammar, right, together, right, in terms of the Greek sense. Husserl, the phenomenology of how do we internally constitute time, you know, and there's some very good things, you know, so I know some, Josh and Arto in particular, have some musical background, that this is very important, the way melody and harmony and the remembering of notes and how we retain things like this is occurring in our, you know, in our consciousness here, internal time consciousness. So this is a very important book. I think it's 1893 to about 1915 he works on it. He works on about 20 years, you know, on internal time consciousness. Right? So anyway, so the consciousness is always consciousness of. What Heidegger wants to get away from is that phenomenology of consciousness, and he may see some remnants of that, and I'll have to look at what Derrida does, if he's going to, he wants to look at what Derrida does in the context of consciousness and Heidegger, right? Because Hegel has a theory of he's about consciousness in many ways. One of the crucial turning chapters of the phenomenology is about consciousness in general, self-consciousness, and the consciousness of the, yes, in a way, is about consciousness, yeah. And the German word is Bewusstsein, B-E-W, yeah, consciousness is this. Bewusstsein. So how do we ultimately become, you know, consciousness of something? Dostoevsky says it's through pain. Felix Budnik wrote a phenomenological study of pain. And as some of you know Junger, now they've published on pain, on his experiences as a soldier. Yeah, Heidegger's good friend, Ernst Junger. Post-World War II friend, not friend in 27. Yeah, they knew of each other, but we're not, yeah. Yeah. So anyway, like I said, there are levels of inner, dialogics going on here, as well as critical stuff. Heidegger wants to get away from consciousness, right? With the Dasein, right? You know, and as he says, science does not think. We need to interrogate the being of the consciousness of science. So for Heidegger, being conscious of something does not mean you're especially thinking. Okay?
Means you're basically just alive.
Means you're becoming aware of something, and et cetera. You know, it's good for behavioral cognitive therapy. You know, maybe in some ways. Are you aware of how much you're using today? You know, it's 9 o'clock. Do you know where your children are? You know, this is behavioral cognitive nonsense at work, right? In my opinion. Only in America, man. Right. Don King summed it up best. Only in America. Yeah.
You know, it's interesting.
Okay, but you guys see this? I mean, there's the antagonist. You have the psychoanalytic movement, which is about bringing, you know, the unconscious to consciousness, right? The goal of therapy is to make everyday misery a little bit more bearable through your awareness and, you know, awareness of your pain and your patterns and your, you know, your neuroses, and hopefully, ultimately, you know, getting rid or abreacting the neurosis, etc. And, you know, this becomes very much, as you know, domesticated. You know, Freud's genius is to take madness out of the asylum and bring it to the couch, right, and make a living off of it. I mean, this is really his genius in terms of the whole, in terms of social history at least. They're other genius. I mean, the other work. But when you really think about this, what does he do? He takes the asylum of the 19th century, all the mad, right? Oh, we just lie down on the couch here. We can study it. I can sit in my office, take notes, and, you know, we'll build a science out of this. Okay. So, I mean, you know, he does this, right? Husserl, on the other hand, and they're both present, by the way. I know I've said this before, and this would be a great novel if you like writing novels of ideas. You know, would be a great novel that they're both in Brentano's seminar on the several senses of the word being and the manifold senses or several senses of the word being in Aristotle. This is where it all starts, in my opinion. Franz Brentano's lectures, right? Freud was there, Husserl was there. Heidegger was not there, but this is a book he studied more actively than any book in his youth, on the several senses of the word, the meaning of the word being in Aristotle, right? What does it mean to be in Aristotle? And those senses of the word. And remember, you know, we did some work on Sinn in German, you know, a sense and direction and meaning, signification, etc. So this is very important to remember. And Freud was there. And you know, this is kind of my joke. Freud took it to the basement, and Husserl took it to the top floor. One went way up with it, the other one went way down with it. You know, these lectures on the several senses. Heidegger studied it. So this begins this thing. Yes, indeed. And this begins this whole moment, if you will, consciousness industry, consciousness philosophy. It's not really an industry, but you know, it became an industry in the banal sense, as you know, especially during the 70s, 60s, and 70s. And so you have the philosophy of consciousness, the philosophies of existence, which was Jaspers, and then people would go back to Heidegger. Jaspers in 1932 begins the philosophy of existence, right? And he writes a book, Existence and Reason and Existence, I'm sorry. And stuff. I mean, I remember, I first read that book in 1974. I remember exactly where I read it too. A place called the Blue Jay Cafe in Baltimore. I really do remember it. Christmas of 1974. Anyway, yeah, so, you know, I have good retention. Anyway, anyway, to go back to this, so, and then Heidegger is going to, you know, locate again the Dasein, right? Husserl stays with consciousness his whole life, and, you know, his great culmination of his career, and this is a book worth reading. It's a response to being in time, if you will. You can read like this. I'm giving you sort of protocols here of reading, if you will. You can read the 1935 The Crisis of the European Sciences as a response to being in time. Then Husserl dies. You know, Heidegger lives till 1976. Yeah. So you can read The Crisis, the 1935, as a response to being in time. He thought being in time was philosophical anthropology. Yeah. Heidegger said being in nothingness was philosophical anthropology and humanistic existentialism. They criticized. So you can see this back and forth movement and these polemics that begin, you know? Yeah. It's not only Marxism that was good for polemics, or, you know, et cetera, right? So these polemics are happening around this. But this was the book, again, if you're gonna read anything to, really get a greater depth, if you will, or understanding what's behind it prior to, if you will, temporally, and the common vulgar conception of time, the internal time consciousness book of Husserl's worth studying. Heidegger kept that alongside the manifold senses of the word being, in a way, probably being in time. I'm being very, very, it's sort of glib, but I think it works at some levels. Is in a way, being in time is a kind of synthesis, if you will, of the several senses of the word being in Brentano's work, those lectures, as well as the internal time consciousness of Husserl, right? And of course, the phenomenological method, when we started with the basic problems of phenomenology, with the reduction and the destruction, right? And the construction. Which is a very good way about going about studying, contextualizing books, etc. I mean, yeah. What's being reduced here? And reduce is not being reductionistic, right? Reducing is getting, again, to try to intuit this, right? Within a perception. Is there a flaw? Yeah. Heidegger wants to go to a philosophy of hearing. More. How do we hear, and how do we have a dialogue, and how do we have a conversation? Right? Right? How do we do this, right? So he's much more about not the eye so much, but much more about the ear. Yeah. Much more about the ear.
That was the part I like about when he was talking about discourse.
Yes.
Discourse was also part of the hearing, that it's what it
Yes,
actually matters.
yes, absolutely. Hearing oneself speak, too, which was also part of the psychoanalytic moment that you begin to hear and become conscious of how you speak, how you present, all these kind of things, Yeah. So I don't know, does this help? I mean, I'm trying to broaden, if you will, the horizon here. One David's laughed at it already, yeah, what?
No,
Yeah.
it's getting, the horizon's quite broad.
Yeah. But if you can kind of focus, narrow down, I mean, we reduce this to, some fundamental lectures by Franz Brentano in the late 19th century, of which the psychoanalytic moment was there, right, through Freud. The phenomenological movement was there through Husserl, right? And remnants, even though he was not there, or the remains somewhat, were in Heidegger with the question of being and the several senses of the word. So this raises the questions and begins to start something. That's what I'm trying to do here, if you will. Yeah, what were you going to say? I'm sorry.
Oh, nothing. It was just
No, what?
it seems like with all these fundamental thinkers, there's always this kind of call for asceticism, like certain kind of ascetic kind of dedication to rigor. When it's like they're trying to sort of.
We had a lot of time for Hana, as I learned from the book, Dave, and that's why I keep it. It's good bedside reading. No, yeah.
It's not eclectic
Not just
thinking.
Hana, you-
This is very.
Not just Hana.
It's the opposite of eclectic thinking. It's the opposite of.
Well, no, this is originary thought. I mean, this
It's
is one of the
extremely focused.
reasons that you're
40
really
years
in
on the
the
same
yeah.
question.
You're ready. You're in
30
the,
years in
yeah.
the same book.
I mean, the interesting thing about this is you're in the presence of really originary creative thinking with all of these people. Certainly Freud in his way, certainly, obviously Husserl, right, in his way, and Heidegger in another way. It's very interesting in this sense. And as you pointed out, I mean, Marx, at least from the Heideggerian perspective, is really about the reversal of method, right? In many ways. This is really the contribution there. It's not so much about, look, Adam Smith knew the labor theory of value. Marx did not invent the labor theory of value. He took it, mathematically, and he talked about, of course, rates of exploitation and all these things. But it's already in Smith, that labor creates value, right? It's already in Adam Smith. I mean, and what is Marx's contribution to the history of philosophy is this reversal, right? In terms of how we do. We invert, right? A method.
Yeah.
In some ways, we're turning upside down, in some ways. We're almost like in a Heideggerian movement of taking it like this, right? It's not a simple inversion, but it's a kind
Schumann
of...
puts it like, he says there is
Right.
before Marx, there was this Aristotelian method, which was,
Yes,
you need a foundation, which is some kind of a metaphysics,
right.
and then that spawns the praxis, the practical application. So you
Right.
have in Aristotle, you have the logics, and then you have the metaphysics, and then you have the applications, the politics, the ethics, you know. Same thing with Descartes, right? The root of the tree is the metaphysics.
Yeah, I mean, with Aristotle, you begin, because they found this later, you have the metaphysics, right? Of which the organon for all
then
of
the
everything
organon.
is the
The
logic,
syllogisms,
right?
yeah.
And then the syllogisms, but then you have the book on the physics, and then from which you begin to get the politics, the ethics,
So
etc.
essentially you
And
have
the
this-
interesting thing about Aristotle, I just want to say this, for Aristotle, the master science is always politics.
Well, that's what Schumann probably doesn't
Agree.
miss.
Yeah, he misses
Yeah.
that. We used to
Yeah.
get in arguments.
Yeah.
It's good. It's all right.
Because in that sense, Marx is
It's
Aristotelian.
a teacher, but
You
anyway,
know,
yeah.
because Marx starts with the politics.
Yes.
You know, so he interrupts the metaphysics, and because he invents, Schumann says, the proletariat. He elevates the proletariat as the major historical figure of
It
his
becomes
day,
a political actor.
when it
on
really
stage.
wasn't.
No, it wasn't.
You know,
Obviously not.
But he said he had to do that in order to break this thinking.
Yes,
that,
yes, that's correct. That's
and then,
correct.
of course, Lenin radicalized it when they actually experiment by
Yes.
saying this is a government of the proletariat.
When
it
Lenin
really
is the
wasn't
first
technically,
experiment,
but-
it really wasn't, but it was an applied experiment,
Yeah.
if you will. You can look at it as the Soviet experiment
Right.
in some ways.
Because
or the
otherwise you can't break-
rule by self,
Yeah.
rule by Soviets, right?
Because otherwise you can't break the logic of politics. The
Right.
logic will be you always have these timeless first principles, the
Right.
elites, whatever. So how do you do revolution? You can't,
Well, going back to what I did earlier, the anarchy, right? In a certain way, that this becomes very radical because you're also abandoning, in the positive sense, the principles,
Right.
right? The beginnings and the commandments and the obedience, right? In order to move in a different direction. But understanding all the time how that arcade was formed, Yeah. This is why understanding, and when I said taking control of, the Verständigung that I mentioned about 4 weeks ago or something, in terms of the notion of understanding for Heidegger, it's not so much only standing under, it's taking control of, is what an understanding means in this strong sense of the word. Understanding, you have to have that taking control of before the interpretation. So you listen to this nonsense in the United States, all these pluralistic interpretations, all these talking heads on TV, you go to academic meetings, everybody's interpreting without understanding. So there's no real interpretation. This is it. I mean, you experience this, right, at these academic meetings? Yeah.
The latest thing is, because the semester started, so this professor puts her syllabus, and she says, I want to share this idea because it might be useful. And she says, just put in your syllabus, addressing your students, that if any of them don't have enough to eat, because of hunger or poverty. She didn't say poverty, of course. Then you should tell them that BMCC has a food pantry, for essentially homeless students or poor students, and they have the right to eat, but in the food pantry, right? So everyone's like, that's such a wonderful idea, helping our students. And I was like, why doesn't anybody raise the outrage that there are hungry students in New York City? That's the fucking problem. It's not that there's a food pantry, And they're like, well, this is something immediate that we could change. We can't change the hunger in America, but we can, And that's the, I mean, it's unbelievable. They're not outraged by the fact that there's hunger. They're just happy that there is a,
Food pantry.
Food pantry.
St. John's Food Bank, the kitchen, soup kitchen.
And I was like, how do you tell?
Which is the 30s notion, there were soup,
Oh,
soup
yeah.
kitchens, back to the 30s.
Then I was like, how do you tell how does the food pantry turn away students who are not really hungry but who pretended they're hungry? I mean, just to mess with them.
Yeah, of course.
Like, can you prove that you're
Yeah.
hungry?
Oh, in Montreal, there are lines around, there's Pops, and they make good food. I know one of the cooks for Pops. It's this van. I think you saw it. They go around the city, Pops, right?
Yeah.
And they stop, and the lines are forever. And then you wonder, are there really that many people that hungry in this neighborhood? No, it's people who want a good meal.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they do the same thing in the People's Park down by Gagnon, where they have the African Nights Festival. It's on the way to the Jazz Festival,
Yes.
but it's down by, Betty, as you walk down from my place, straight down that park. That's an old poor people's park that was built for poor people to go to. So they have the feeding of the homeless. The line is literally 2 blocks long on Friday afternoons to get food. But you look at these people, they all look pretty healthy, you kind of checking it out,
I can't remember what his name is, but a priest said, I feed the hungry and they call me a saint.
Brazilian archbishop.
Brazilian archbishop,
I
yes.
asked why
Why they are
hungry,
poor,
and they
I
say
call them
I'm
a
a
communist.
Communist, yeah.
I got written up by an IRI student. Professor Pelias is a communist. He'll try to
Recently?
indoctrinate, yeah. This is-
Try to indoctrinate?
Yeah. I had to laugh. Yeah.
He was complaining?
Yes.
Did you know who it was? Or?
No, I have no idea.
Yeah.
It's probably some IRA student from last semester. Who knows? I mean, he's right, but it's okay. I mean, yeah.
Question, did you
The
succeed?
question is,
Did you
yeah,
succeed?
I succeeded with the rest of the kids.
They asked me to.
Don't
"Are you a
worry, be
liberal?"
wary, he's gonna try to
I'm
indoctrinate
like,
you.
much worse
Well,
than
I'm laughing.
Yeah.
Yeah. First of all, I'm gonna say communism is not a doctrine, it's a practice. That's the first response I would have to indoctrination.
I was walking here and there were 2 volunteers for Human Rights Watch or whatever. They're like,
Oh,
excuse
yeah,
me,
yeah.
sir, do you care about human rights? I was like, no. They're like, oh my God.
You dealt with his verbiage,
No, I
the
just-
Declaration of the Rights of Man? That's how Lacan opened his lectures in '64. You know this story?
No.
Oh, he comes in, he's been denied a space, for a few years, and so they're trying to take away the seminars. He began in 53. So 64, Althusser and Levi-Strauss and others give him the space to come back. So he comes in and he says, I want to say I'm very happy to be continuing this, aside from all the verbiage of the human rights and the Declaration of Human Rights. I'm here today. I want to thank my good friend Claude Levi-Strauss, and Ferdinand Braudel,
Yeah.
all the who's who of the pantheon of the 20th century, and then he begins. But yeah, he knew this. I mean, they all know this. In Gramsci, elections, yeah. Rights? Give me a break. Yeah.
The students have the rights to eat at the food pantry.
Yes. Yeah. Okay.
That's all.
Well, let's go on a little bit. Are we sort of, we're historically kind of grounded here somewhat? I mean, I'm trying to, build from the back, again, front to front, right? It gives you, the notion of, look, the 20th century is marked by multiple philosophical movements. One, of course, is the philosophy of consciousness, Husserlian phenomenology and its avatars, of which Heidegger borrows heavily from method, right? And is also very much in the Brentanoan move on the senses of the word being in Aristotle. Okay? So that you have that happening vis-a-vis Brentano. Of course, you have the psychoanalytic movement, right, that begins, and I think the committees are formed in Dave, the date? I know 1900 marks the interpretation of dream, but what was the first committee with Otto Rank and Max Etienne and all these people, Carl Abraham? 1908, 1906 or something, they formed the actual committee.
Yeah, I don't.
And then he puts to rest Jung and Totem and Taboo, right? Yeah, but anyway, all to say, this is happening as well, this other movement of the 20th century. Of course, the Leninist break, in my opinion, the rupture, that puts into practice this experiment, of Marx, right? And for Lenin, the three components were what? Political economy, Hegelian philosophy.
And Nietzsche, even though he wouldn't say
No,
it.
he never said Nietzsche. Right, right, exactly.
Maybe through the people he read in Russian
Yes,
who were.
right. So anyway, he would go through the main components of Marxism, and one, of course, was the Hegelian. So you had this return of Hegel, right, that was taking place because the Neo-Kantian movement, remember again, in this backdrop in Europe, especially in Germany, Switzerland, and partially in France, the Neo-Kantian movement is happening big time, okay? Big time, Hermann Cohn being the most creative of that, who was Benjamin's teacher, as well as Ernst Cassirer. So you have this kind of Jewish Kantianism. I mean, I'm sorry I use that adjective, but it's true in some ways because the best students came out were Benjamin, Cassirer, and others, right? Right? Yeah. Okay. So this was happening as well. Yeah. And then you have the Sunday study group, Budapest with Lukács, but you also had the Sunday group with Krakauer doing Kant with Adorno and others. This was also happening concurrently, right? So it's a very, very interesting period. And then, of course, you had Wittgenstein, who was very much in terms of the language, right? And the language games and logical treatises, and of course, the Principia Mathematica of Russell and Whitehead. The principles of mathematics and what Braud is mathematical ontology. They don't call it mathematical. In fact, Russell leaves Heidegger out of his history of Western philosophy, not included. Yeah. Give you an idea of the English. So you have a kind of consciousness, right? Of course, the Marxist tradition, which was really about practical consciousness, overturning questions that became much more, as Marx, you were saying, begins more with the Aristotelian politia than he does with the Aristotelian metaphysics. But where I think Schuurman's coming from is labor metaphysics, right? He's kind of reading, one part of Marx is coming out of labor metaphysics, right? Rather than just the politics. So that's open to question. And then, then of course Heidegger's, 1927 being in time. And this is sort of the moments of the 20th century. This played much more with the writers and the poets in many ways, especially of a kind of German avant-garde in some ways. The Marx, of course, played much better with the German, avant-garde in terms of Brecht and others that came out of that tradition, right? All claimed Hölderlin, all three traditions in some ways, but primarily both Heidegger, Adorno. I reread, it's a very dense essay, I'm gonna have to read it again, Parataxis of Adorno on Hölderlin and poetry and Heidegger's reading. It's a very, very interesting but very dense, called Parataxis on Hölderlin's poetry. Anyway, again, just to situate it, and what's been spawned since then, obviously, is the French deconstructionists, combination of French Freud, Lacan, as well, right? And then, of course, the structuralists, and now, today, Badiou, we read The Century, some of you in this room, what's that?
The only one left.
Yeah, it's one of the only ones left, yeah. It's true in a way in terms of the comprehensive ontologies that Badiou is one of the last left, and he sees himself in that line, and you can read, listen, again, this is complicated, and I'm making these kind of pronouncements half tongue-in-cheek, but you could read Difference and Repetition by Deleuze, the 1968 work, as a transitional work of philosophy into the future from Heidegger's Being in Time. And then you can also read oppositionally, but still some of it incorporated in, by Jews, attempted ontology, being an event, logics of worlds, and I think the new one is out, immanence of truth, right, the immanence of truth. And then, you know, when you start using words like immanence, you're back in temporality and Dasein. So this is interesting when you start to think of this, and immanent critique. And what does this mean in terms of the great thinkers of temporality, such as Hegel, such as, you know, obviously Heidegger, and then Bergson, who I'm forgetting is another major player in this. You know, Henri Bergson was the uncle to Marcel Proust. You know, it's a very, very, you know, active and creative family in France. And Time and Free Will, right, Bergson, on creativity, his work on creativity. William Faulkner, the only philosopher he read seriously was Henri Bergson, to my knowledge. I have a good friend who's, I've had discussions with him, who's a Faulkner specialist. You know, he read Bergson very actively, and nobody else really.
And
Played like a-
Proust wrote 6 volumes
Seven.
on time.
7.
7?
Remembrance of Things Past.
Right.
Or In Search of Lost Time is a much better
Yes,
title.
that's
In
what
Search
his
of Lost
title
Time,
was.
which Sartre says he has a lost metaphysics. Sartre was all about the future.
7? Are you sure?
I'm pretty sure. I
it's
think I can
6.
probably name
I
it.
think it's 6.
Swan's Way, the Germantes Way, the Megalese Way, right?
What's
Sodom
the
and
third
Gomorrah,
one?
the Megalese Way, is the way of society, the way of the, you know,
Okay.
religion, and the way of art, right? The paths, right? Then you had Sodom and Gomorrah,
Yes.
past recaptured,
Yes.
and there's one other one, I think, in there. Yeah, I'll check, but I'm pretty sure it's 7. Yeah. Maybe it's 6, it's all right, it doesn't really matter, you know?
6,
We're not on Jeopardy.
6.5.
Yeah, 6.5, what were you gonna say?
6.
No,
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
just thinking
Yeah,
back to,
yeah.
you know, Freud, you know, when the study group started.
Yes.
And it had to be before 1900.
His study group, you mean?
The group, the Vienna, yeah, it's,
The Vienna Circle
yeah, right, because.
of Freudians, you mean?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
you know, they were meeting,
Well,
whatever, but,
They met, but I don't think they had, the committee was not formed then.
the committees weren't formed, but Nietzsche says there's this group in Vienna that's the only ones that seem to understand what I'm saying. You know, so that had to be before.
He said that?
Yeah.
And he wasn't functioning
No,
after
this is way
1889.
before 1900.
Freud's
obviously.
only 31 years old, he's
Yeah.
still in Charcot's care, so to speak.
No, it's in the book, Nietzsche and Freud, you know, the part of the trilogy.
Really?
Yeah, but they never got together, they planned to meet in different places, you know, and have.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, that's news, I mean, I'll have to see this. Who's
Yeah.
the trilogy, what were you talking about,
This is when
Irving
you
Yalom's?
told me about the.
Yalom's work? Irving Yalom, the
No,
psychoanalyst
I know
who's on the
Yalom,
West
I don't
Coast?
think it's
No?
Yalom. No, it's,
Was Nietzsche conscious when he was mad?
Not really, he thought his girlfriend was the sun. He'd walk around and poem poems of his girlfriend.
So he
the
wasn't-
sun.
he didn't
I mean,
really-
At least I have affections in Montreal, I mean, you know, anyway.
He didn't really understand what was happening.
No, he was under the care of his sister, who was a case, you know, who ruined things, and, you know, basically was married to a, you know, proto-Nazi, Bernhard Forster, right? And then the mother, who was, you know, we'd take a look at the picture of his mother, you talk about severe, you know, like going to the, sit down, you know.
Nietzsche?
Nietzsche's mother.
And the
yeah.
sister hired Rudolf Steiner to teach her about philosophy so she
Yes.
could understand, and he
Yeah.
said, I can't teach this woman anything.
Right,
And
well,
he
that's a good
left.
point. You know, that's the best thing Rudolf Steiner did in some ways. Rudolf Steiner.
Was he a
Oh,
Kantian?
what a trilogy. I'm trying to remember this. I mean, I know Paul Laurent Assun wrote a very,
Yeah,
very
Assun,
good
Assun,
book
yeah.
on Freud and Nietzsche.
yeah.
But he must be,
That's Assun.
that's it, really?
Yeah.
He said, really? Okay, that's it. I'll have to look at that again, yeah.
Yeah, no, there was
Okay.
this whole
Because
complicated thing.
1889, Freud has not even done studies in hysteria by that point. Studies in Hysteria is published in 1895. Right? This is when he discovers free association. The
Fleece.
psychoanalytic,
Yeah.
no, this is with a Bloyer.
Right, I'm sorry,
Right,
right.
yeah, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Place is about the nose and,
Yeah, the
you know,
nose
the
and
women's,
the-
yeah. These are crazy people.
No.
You talk about patriarchy and
So,
what's
I
good.
mean,
But anyway,
yeah.
interesting patriarchy,
Very
how
interesting.
perverse the
Yeah.
species is.
In the screenplay that Sartre wrote for
The Freud scenario.
The
Yeah,
Freud
you know what John
scenario.
Huston said about him?
well, he
He
said it's
doesn't,
much
he
too,
can't shut up.
it's
That's
much too
all right.
long.
Yeah, it took too long.
But, and then he told him to change it, and he made it longer. So.
Yes. I'm sorry.
He was in the-
1,000 pages or so for a movie script. You know who played Freud? Montgomery Clift.
Yeah, that was
A very ambivalent actor about his sexual preferences.
Yeah, horrible.
Yeah,
This
horrible. Good
sort
friend of
figure
Liz
the light
Taylor.
bulb going off and his mother giving him the idea
Terrible,
for the whole
terrible,
world.
terrible choice to have
But,
played. And John Huston was the director. Yeah.
Yeah, but you know, Fleece.
Yeah.
figures-
They broke.
Pardon?
They broke. That friendship broke
Oh
up.
yeah, well,
Big
he
time.
broke a series of friendships.
Yes, yes, he did.
You know, but Sartre focused on each one of them.
Right.
He paid a lot of attention to the
So I'd like that, you know. So the last friend Sartre had was Camus, and he broke with him.
Oh,
Yeah, yeah.
There he goes.
Yeah.
But yeah, so no, in Owen's book, it's you know, it's really interesting how they.
Yeah, well, yeah, sure.
You
I mean,
know,
that's a fascinating, this 19th century is something we don't really look at in terms of all the enterprises going on. We think about, we read the books, but we're not really looking at all the movements that are crossing by each other and whose path, because you also have the beginnings of the Jungian movement. Obviously, Hesse was very important to Carl Jung, you know? And he's beginning to get his ideas and coming of age, late 19th century, right? As well, right? Yeah. Yeah. There's a new edition of Berlin Alexanderblatts that's come out from New York Review of Books, if anybody's interested. A great film by Fassbinder, you know. It's a very long read. It's epic. It's kind of like the founding of West Germany in the modern sense. It's kind of like reading the Iliad and the Odyssey of modern Berlin. Yeah. You seen the movie? Did you see the movie? It's what, 18 hours or something? I mean, I didn't sit through the whole, I mean, it was in parts when I saw it, but
Yeah.
anyway. I'm crazy, but not that crazy, yeah. One way you save money, go to the theaters where you like two movies and you just go to one after another, you know, just walk in the hallway and then walk in, you know, you get two for the price
Oh
of
yeah.
one. Yeah.
The anthology film archives would have like, you know, those lengthy, you know. I don't
They had
know.
this Orson Welles film that's very underdone last night. I didn't go, but I heard about it.
Which one was that?
It's Orson Welles made a film about making films in the States and all this. It's a kind of unknown thing of his, and they presented it last night. I'll look up the title.
I know that they've been trying to do something with the other side of the moon, or other side of, that they've been trying to do something with for the last 35 years. 40 years, it's all
Yeah.
family and
Yeah,
probate.
I see.
Conflicting
Yeah.
claims to it. You know, John Huston plays this director that, who dies at the end of the, you know, is supposed to die. It's sort of one day in the life of John Huston as the director.
Well, he is very Heideggerian. What don't you have, Mr. Getz? The future. The future.
Yes, yes.
What don't you have, Mr. Cross? The future, Mr. Getz, the future. It's a great sight sequence from China. You seen Chinatown?
Yes, I have.
Yeah. Nora, you seen that? No? Oh,
Yeah.
a must see, man.
Yes.
A must see. Heidegger is really about, that's Chinatown, Jake. You can't go in there. Right. That's really what this is about. It is Chinatown. It's abyss. Anyway. Someplace, right?
The issue of water is becoming,
Big issue.
again, a huge issue.
Well, it's a great study by Mike Davis. You know, City of Quartz is a great work. I mean, he never really accomplished anything like that afterwards. I mean, he's a very good scholar, and he takes on worthwhile projects. But that's just a magnificent work, and I mean that's inspired by John Donne. Yeah. Beautiful, beautiful work. Yeah. But that's a film that should be seen at least once a year.
Oh, yeah.
Each year. Yeah. It's top 10.
Well, being a Polanski film, it's also has to deal with that whole issue of
Well, the movie's about incest.
And the movie's about incest, that's right.
I mean, in order to begin
Water
with.
and incest, right? But I was just reminded of all of the filmography of Roman Polanski and how,
Well, he did The Tenant after that one.
what?
He did The Tenant with Isabelle Adjani. He did that when he was still in America. It was after John Donne. No, the incident happened at Jack Nicholson's house.
Oh, yes.
You know, now if you're a mother, I mean, I'm being bad today, but anyway, I'm sorry about this. If you're a mother, why would you take your daughter to meet with Roman Polanski about a part in the film, and you take her to Jack Nicholson's house to do so, and this is 1975, 1976?
Yeah.
What's the mother thinking about? You know, she's gonna get instant fame because of her talent, and, fine.
And she left the daughter there at the,
Yeah.
Overnight, right?
And Jack Nicholson's telling it, yeah. And living with Angelica, Houston, John Huston's daughter. That was his partner at the time. I mean, I'm just saying, sometimes it takes two. I'm not justifying what Polanski does. Please don't hear me that way, but, yeah.
I
That's
just
not the
don't
issue.
think you should judge an artist's work by his life.
I agree with you, Chris.
Otherwise
Now we're
you
on the same
hate
page.
Chuck
Make sure you
Berry.
get this on YouTube. Yeah, right.
You would hate Chuck Berry if you,
oh, really?
Chuck Berry was a monster. Monster.
Jerry Lee Lewis.
you wanted to be paid before he got
Monster.
on the stage.
Monster. Yeah.
No,
It's a good scene in Cadillac Records. Have you seen Cadillac Records? It's a bullshit movie, but
No.
it's a very interesting, the sequence with Chuck Berry, who's played by Mos Def. It's very good. The two white girls go into the car. Mr. Berry? Oh, what you girls doing? Right? It's a very funny scene, about Chuck Berry and this whole thing of interstate and they picked him up, they got him on interstate transportation. Yeah. I mean, yeah. But, the police are there waiting for Chuck Berry to cross the line. They already know. I mean, it's not like they, really did. They had to get Chuck Berry out, creating too much energy in the thing.
Yeah.
In the world. Yeah. There's a great, I don't know if you ever saw the Dick Cavett show, and John Simon, this theater critic, very snotty, was on the same program with Little Richard, and they're reflecting on the 60s. So John Simon's going through all these levels of abstraction, and Little Richard just finally gets up. I don't know about you, but in the 60s were about, he starts going into Good Golly Miss Molly. Starts singing on it and dancing on it. Very funny. John Simon didn't know what to do. Perfect, he couldn't have staged it better. Yeah. He was great too. He's kind of started in New Orleans, Little Richard. Cosmo Vitelli's not Vitelli, I'm sorry, Matassa, Cosmo Matassa's records. It was a great recording studio for rock and roll. We were friends of my family, the Matassas. One of the kids almost married one of my cousins. We used to do business. No, he's Italian, Greek-Italian connection, but it was very, very interesting. There's a thing out of the Cosmo Matassa History of Rock and Roll, and you get all these early discs, Fats Domino, etc. We're way off of, but it shows you how temporality works sometimes. This was started in the 40s and the 50s, and Little Richard was one of their original artists. Yeah, before he got going. Yeah. No, you had this all over the place. Yeah, Jerry Lee Lewis, another one. Chuck Berry. You're right. Yeah. And yeah, do you separate out the life from the work? You brought this up. I mean, what do you think?
Heidegger did, right?
Yeah, he did.
When you studied Aristotle.
You know,
No, actually,
Polanski, can't you judge Polanski? I mean, this is work of genius,
Yeah,
Chinatown.
no,
I mean, I don't like the word, but it's a work of artistic excellence. I mean, no question about it.
Oh,
Yeah.
going all the way back to
Yeah.
Knife in the Water and.
Yeah, Knife in the Water,
everything.
exactly.
No, he's such a.
And you look at
terrific,
Venus in Furs, and you see he's not apologetic. He cast his wife in the role as Wanda in Venus in Furs. This is Polanski. He made a remake of the Massoche Venus in Furs. Magnificent. You never seen Venus in Furs?
No, I
didn't
Magnificent.
even know it
Magnificent.
existed.
Magnificent.
Tate or-
No. His current wife, the French actress, she's incredibly good in this. What's her name? Not Savigny or something like that. But yeah, absolutely spectacular in the film. And she says, you know, with my husband, we have different roles when we're in director and actress. We're married, but you know, when it comes to the making of the movie, she's very good in interviews. You know, typically. Yeah. No, you should see Venus in Furs. It's a magnificent performance. And Etienne Balibar's daughter is married to the actor who plays the role of Massoche, of Sasso and Massoche. Yeah.
Yeah, I always-
John Balibar. She plays John Balibar's husband is a director who directs her in this film about the French pop star Barbara, who had a very tragic life.
Balibar's husband?
No, her wife. Yeah. Oh, I said
Yeah.
husband?
Yeah.
Oh, really?
That was
Balibar's daughter, I'm sorry, yeah.
daughter.
Yeah. Jean Balibar's husband. Etienne Balibar's daughter, Jean Balibar's husband, plays Sassar Massoche in the film Venus in Furs, and he's also a director who's directing Jean Balibar in the film about the great French pop singer Barbara, who's worth listening to. Very, very excellent, soulful French singer. Beautiful stuff. Yeah, beautiful. The kind of modern Piaf. Yeah, Edith Piaf. Yeah. So I mean, yeah, I think Chris is right. You don't judge, you know, in a sense, right?
No, I
Yeah.
agree.
Yeah.
You know, for the most part, I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, Harvey Weinstein is reputed to be a genius in promotion and whatever, but
Well, I watched Pulp Fiction the other night. He and his brother put Quentin Tarantino on the map with Pulp Fiction.
yeah.
He took the risk with Pulp Fiction.
Yeah, I mean, it's really difficult because he really is a kind of, you know, an ogre, you know.
Yeah, no, I understand.
He's,
But does that mean you don't go to the movies anymore, or we censor them and et cetera? This is part of the problem of our culture. We
Yeah.
start talking this way, and what's lost in there is a kind of, you know, the retention only becomes protension. You know, the tension is eliminated, you know, in some ways, in terms of the temporality, et cetera. You know, I mean, this used to be, there was a volume dedicated to this, and it's a good starting point, in my opinion, to think about this. Shall we burn Desat? Shall we burn Sot? And this was, is it necessary to burn Desat?
This was
And this
after
was a-
World War II.
Exactly, Chris.
When the atrocities became revealed, and the question was, especially in France, should we burn Assad because he relishes all of these atrocities?
I mean, only 3%. I was looking at the numbers of how many French people participated in the resistance.
Very
And
few.
3%.
Yes,
Oh,
Less
my
than
mother
3%.
said, my mother went to school in France. She was there before Vichy. She was there in the early 30s. She used to laugh at all her classmates. They all loved André Gide. She would say, he's gay. Why, you know, why are you wasting your time? She used to say about Gide. It was funny. But she said the first thing the French do when the Germans come to town, they get in bed with them. That's what she said. That's the first thing. It's not a surprise. Yeah. No, the resistance was very small.
Less than 3%.
It was a great romantic moment in France because it included great intellectuals, and there's not, I'm not trying to, you know, but in a way, yes, they cooperated like this. Yeah. Faster than anybody. No, the heroes in the European sector were the Greeks. Really, I gotta say, aside from my prejudice
The
of
Greeks and the Poles.
and the
The
Poles,
Italian,
yeah. to a degree.
Yeah.
Not like the Greeks. The Greeks held up. I mean, you know, I found, they would bomb Nazi compounds.
Yeah.
They wouldn't sit around and say, is this theoretically right to do? You know, and let's wait. They just go do it, you know? It was now
And in
time.
Poland, it was mostly the Jews, the Polish Jews who
Yes.
did the Warsaw. I mean, it wasn't just the Poles. I mean, that's another thing that's forgotten now in Poland is that their anti-fascism was essentially the Polish Jews, you know, who were communists. Most
Yes,
of them.
a lot of
I
them
think-
communists.
well-
In the Greek case, it was mostly communists, I promise
I mean, the
you that.
Polish army in exile,
Mostly
who fought from
communists.
England,
Yeah.
that kind of doesn't count,
Yeah.
because they ran away from Poland.
No, but the
You know.
Poles, you know, took to the forests and you know,
Yeah, that's true.
yeah, I mean.
But like
they
the
were also
main,
anti-Semitic.
the Warsaw Ghetto uprisings.
Yeah, the Warsaw Ghetto uprising, but the, you know, and
But the Greeks delayed the Germans from getting to Russia.
Mhm.
They actually helped the Russians in the cause. And this is another, and the Serbians too fought against the Nazis. One of the reasons that the Greek government, even though it was a very mediocre, you know, middle of the road, you know, liberal government, you know, before Syriza, which is now even worse because it pretended to be something, but anyway, that's another story. They supported Milosevic because of that long history with the Serbian people, you know, in terms of fighting against the Nazis. You know, they really, yeah. So they held up. I mean, you know, Hitler may have won in Russia if he had gone in before, in the autumn or in the summer of that year. They held him up until the winter. Yeah, they fought back. And they would blow up compounds. They would not play this game of it was only, you know, surreptitious or, you know, secretive meetings and all this. They'd find out where they were and they'd go up and blow up the compounds and fight. The beautiful poems about this by the Axiom Este of Odysseus Elitis and, you know, real resistance. And the Italians, of course, too. You know, Montali and others, you know, have very interesting poems of that period. Yeah. Another great movie about the Italian Jews, The Garden of Uffizi Contini. So beautiful, absolutely beautiful film. Vittorio De Sica, Dominique Sanda. Yeah, just absolutely beautifully. The cinematography is great, the acting, the pacing is almost perfect. You know, see, the thing about this is he didn't know cinema. He loved Kurosawa, by the way, Heidegger.
Oh, yeah?
Yes, he loved Kurosawa.
Oh, yeah, I think I
His
remember.
favorite film was Rashomon. Perspectives on the Rashomon. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Loved it.
Loved it.
Heidegger sitting there.
Loved it.
Loved it. First time I ever saw him, and I've read a lot of Heidegger, right? The first time I've ever seen Heidegger speak positively of a film and glowingly. Yeah.
And
Was he a big moviegoer or?
No, I don't think so. Wittgenstein was. Love cowboys, westerns. Would go sit in the front seat like this. Go alone to the movies and sit in the front. Love westerns. Love westerns. Like, you know, the leader of North Korea, Kim Jong-un.
he likes the westerns too.
Loves westerns.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, loves westerns.
Yeah, I heard that, right?
Yeah, yeah. Loves westerns.
It's a big thing.
Has a huge collection, everything. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah.
The Jamaicans love westerns.
Well, there you go.
They're all really kind.
Just another Western movie, as MC Solar says. French Raffles.
Soldiers.
Yeah. The harder it comes, the western.
Yeah, the harder they come is a Western. Yeah, yeah, of course. Yeah, yeah. High Noon,
Yeah.
Nietzsche and High Noon, right? Yeah, the great noon, Nietzsche, High Noon.
Sure.
Do not forsake me, oh my darling. Right?
Yeah, a film about McCarthyism, basically.
It was. Yes, that's a good way of phrasing that. That is, it was an allegory of the McCarthy.
Yeah, no, they're very
Gary
specific.
Cooper.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Everyone said they'd be behind me when the going got rough.
Right. That's right.
There was nobody there to bluff.
Nobody. That's right. That's right. That's right. Yeah. Carl Malden, huh?
Yeah.
One rat among our many. Lee J. Cobb, another rat. All kinds of rats.
There are a lot of rats,
A
right?
lot of rats. Okay, let's go over a little more and then we'll yeah. So, listen, to go back to this whole concern of you know, the awaiting, the retaining, and the acting. Try to keep that as a structure of the circumspection concern. You're taking care in the awaiting, in the retaining, as well as in the acting, right? All this is going on at once, okay? So, and then he uses all these terms, again, like I said, in section 79, the meanwhile, the during, the throughout, and the lasting. He gives multiple examples. Let me give you the pages on that, and then we'll go to public time. If you look at the now, the then, the earlier, today, when, he goes through all kinds of sections on the things on this. And then the next thing is the datability, right? The datability
That was
of time.
interesting.
Yeah, go ahead. You want to talk about it? Go ahead.
No, I mean, I have a question, sort of
Very
how to
interesting
understand that.
in terms of that, the structure of the datability,
That
which
word.
is interpreted with now, then, on that former equation. The elementary proof, this is page 389, that what has been interpreted originates from temporality interpreting itself. And this temporality, again, is Dasein. Okay? Is Dasein. Saying now, we always already understood, and now that without actually saying. We say now, we don't say now that, usually, right? Right? And you know, you hear a lot of presentations, and now, or now, right? Which is really a now that, you know, as you look at the structure of the language, now that something is happening. Okay, this is interesting. Saying now, we always have already understood now that without actually saying. Why? Because the now interprets a making present of beings. In that now that lies the ecstatic nature of the present, right? The datability of the now, then, and formation is the reflex of the ecstatic constitution of temporality, and is thus essential for time itself that has been expressed. Right? Essential for time expressed. Right? The structure of the datability of the now, the then, and on that former occasion is evidence for the fact that they stem from temporality and are themselves time. Look, I mean, I'll go back. I know this is personal, but you know, I've kind of been fixated. But, you know, so I have this friend in Montreal, like a piano player anyway. So I put, you know, she tells me, you know, we'll the Bill Evans song, you know, We'll Meet Again, right? You know, which is a play on Vera Lynn's great thing at the end of Dr. Strangelove and the coming home of the soldiers in 1945. We'll meet again, you know, etc. But Bill Evans reworks this in terms of a homage to his brother, Henry, who commits suicide, right? And he does a beautiful piece about this, We'll Meet Again. She writes me a nice thing about the ballad, We'll Meet Again. So it's temporal, right? We'll meet in the future again, right? Repetition and the temporal, you know, it will happen, right? In a certain way, right? So I leave it on the answering machine after hearing this. I get a response. It's gorgeous, beautiful, almost like ecstasis reflex to this song that has tremendous meaning to her own work, right? Meaning to me in terms of the, you know, we'll meet again. It's been thrown out. And then also to interpret it at the level of that, you know, she picks up where it's cut off in terms of the thing with Eddie Gomez's great bass. I don't know if you know Eddie Gomez, but he's a great bass player that, you know, was with Bill Evans for a long time. He's a great bass thing. So she picks up on this. So this becomes, you can see the ecstatic reflex, hearing something, you know, that is part of the structural repetition, right? Is part of the protension, right? The perception as well as the retention of something, right? Operative here. And he's really talking about this as datability and our constitution of ecstasies in the now, right? You're hearing it now, right? In the now time. He's still dealing with vulgar conceptions of time, right? But it's the now, right? The taking concern. Listen, don't hear Heidegger only as destroying things, right? He's also bringing this all into play. He's very comprehensive here about time, right? This datability. So let's go on, the reflex, right? The structure of the datability of the now, the then on that form is evidence, and on that former occasion we'll meet again, right? In a way, is evidence for the fact that they stem from temporality and are themselves time itself, right? The interpretive expression of now, then, and on that former occasion is the most primordial way of giving the time. And you can think about the giving too. Let me just do this real quickly too. I should have put this up here with the intuition of essences. You know, the S-gift, it gives, is the phenomena. It gives, right, something. It's a gifting of time. And going back to your friend Derrida, he writes a very beautiful piece called Given Time, right? The gift of time. And then he transposes this into a reading, very clever, of Baudelaire's Counterfeit Money. Bitcoin, in other words, right? Anyway, something like that. You know, cryptocurrency, the new counterfeit money, right? So anyway, it's interesting when you start thinking about existence as a gift, right? As it gives, right? Giving something. Back to Karatani, that we did a little bit last week, about the gift and reciprocity. This is working in phenomenology. The phenomenologists would say this is the structure of intersubjectivity. Intersubjectivity. They would use that kind of language. I'm trying my best to cross-fertilize here. You know, you can do it, I think, you know, with some force. You know, I'm not, you know, you have to think about it if you're going to write an essay or build a book on it, but there are these moments here. So anyway, the it gives is very important in terms of time. So Arto, think about this as given time too, right? Taking care of given time, right? Okay? So try to think that through. Let's look a little more, right? Right? In the ecstatic unity of temporality that is understood alongside datability, but unthematically and unrecognizable as such, Dasein has already been disclosed to itself as being in the world. Remember, we're always being in a world. We're not just being, right? We're in the world being, right? Always think of that. Always the given here. The S-gift, in the world it is given, right? Right? Is always happening, right? And interworldly beings have already discovered along with it. And because of this, interpreted time, too, always already has a date stamp, right? So he's talking about interpreted time, right? Not time itself, right? And datability is one of those interpretations of time. On the basis of the beings encountered in the disclosedness of the there, now that the door slams, the Jesuits, please close the door on the way out. They're always good at that. Close the door. Now that my book is missing, right? To David with R.M. and Heidegger, right? Okay. So, because they have the same origin from ecstatic temporality, the horizons. And remember ecstatic temporality, I did a little bit of the structure of this. The flat line, if you will, again, is the now and the present, right? Right? The past is coming from having beenness, right? And the future, there is no such thing really as the present. It's always the future, right? It is this catapulting or this originary catapulting into the future, right? The now, the then, on the former, have the datability, today when, later on when, and earlier when, right? If awaiting, understanding itself in the then interprets itself and in so doing, as a making present, understands what it is awaiting in terms of its now. You know? So you await an encounter, you await a meeting, you're waiting to encounter it in the now, then the and the now not yet already lies in the specification of the then. So he's going through all these temporal, if you will, moments and variables, right, in order to be complete before he's going to go on to within timeness and taking care of in the next section, in section 80, right, in which he begins to talk about public time, if you know. Okay, so here we're datability. We're going to move on from datability to public time, Okay, any questions, Arto? I mean, you know, anyway, I mean, we can go back to this next week. I know it's complicated, I mean, I really do. You know, but I want you to realize what he's doing here again is he's trying to be as thorough and as complete. His intention, again, is to be complete in terms of, because he's trying to, again, think time in a completely different new way, in a new way, right? In a new way. Okay? So, the awaiting makes present, understands the until then. You know? We'll meet again, right? Anyway, interpretation articulates that until then, namely it has its time, as the in-between that also has a relation of datability. This relation is expressed in the meanwhile, you know? So he's using these terms, as I mentioned before, the meanwhile, right? The then, you know, I used all these terms earlier, right? I am, right? Throughout, during, the lasting, he uses these terms. The relation is, in the meantime, taking care can all, again, articulated and awaiting the during, the duration. You know, think of this as durational time. This is also, you know, and we'll talk more about this when we get to Bergson, about durational time, right? The during itself by specifying further thens, right? The further thens. The until then is subdivided by a number from then until thens that, however, have been embraced beforehand in the awaiting project of the primary then, right? The lasting is articulated in the understanding of the during that awaits and makes present. This duration is, again, the time revealed in the self-interpretation of temporality, a time that is thus actually, but unthematically, undertaken and taking care as a span of time, right? As a span of time. This making present, the making present that awaits and retains, interprets a during with a span. Only because in so doing is disclosed to itself as being ecstatically stretched along. Very nice, huh? In historical temporality, stretched along. So think about your piece on Lenin here in a certain way. Reloaded again, right? We're already playing with these kind of things right here in terms of this historical thing. Just by, you know, titling your thing. He's got a piece for situations, a critical book review of, what's his name, Krauss? Thomas Krauss's new critical biography of Lenin. And Arto's got a, you know, a very good book review of it, and we were looking for a title, and we came up, Lenin Reloaded, comma, again.
Yeah.
Right? Right? So in a sense,
No
we're kind of what's that?
No semicolons.
No semicolons, comma,
Yeah.
pause. Again, right? So we have the temporality, we have the in terms of the temporality, right? We have both the awaiting, right? Right? All this thing about datability and historicity working here. So if this makes more sense to you this way, I mean, he's really trying to get, and this is a question of temporality, not Zeitlichkeit. You know, he's going to go through definition, and I'll do this next week with the German. There's a difference between temporality and Zeitlichkeit. You know, yeah. Okay, we're gonna go through this. Is the notion of time as Zeit, and his notion of time as temporality. Okay, we'll go through that next time. But anyway, the taking care, and you go down, I'm not going to read the whole thing, awaits, retain, make, allows itself time in this or that way and gives time to itself in taking care. So you take care of waiting for something. You take care of retaining something, right? Yeah. It's going to go through these multiple levels. You know, you take care always of acting, right? Enacted. Happening at this moment, right? The happening, which could be, in some ways, you could relate this acting now, time, to event. Okay? So keep that in mind. I'm not sure, but I mean, it's a speculative thought for today, you know, that the arrivedness in Heidegger and the event in Badiou becomes part of the now happening at this moment, right? And the moment, again, the Augenblick, right? The twinkling of an eye at the event, right? Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so he's gonna go through the sheer nows, right, in the present, etc., right? And how one has time in relation to one's actual existence, right? How does one have time? Right? Have time. How you're stretched along, time elapsing. All of these things are being played out here. You know, the key term here to me is the stretches of time. You know, how time stretches, and you could think of body here too, the extension of the body, right? And you know, the body of time, if you will, and the body and time, which would be a great book. You know, the body as time. Yeah, anyway. Okay, in an earlier passage, and we didn't read this section, but authentic and inauthentic existing, bottom of the page of 330, were characterized with regard to the modes of temporalizing of temporality upon which such existing is founded, right? And we're gonna go back to this authentic temporality and inauthentic temporality. Of course, this has to do with being towards death and, you know, that relationship, right? Okay, the irresoluteness of inauthentic existence. To be authentic means to be resolute, right? And resoluteness. Temporalizes itself in the mode of a making presence that does not await, but it forgets. So the politics of inauthenticity can be talked about in terms of, and I'm getting a lot of trouble with some friends for using that phrase, politics of inauthenticity, but I think it's not a bad term because it has to do with forgetting. It has to do with the forgetting of historical memory, and it has to do with the practice of the acting in the now as well. You know, the acting as event. So we'll talk more about that too, as a happening, denying the happening. The irresolute person understands himself in terms of the events and the accidents nearest by which they're encountered in much making present, earns themselves upon them in changing way. It's Trump's fault. It's always Trump's fault, right? It's never anybody else's fault. Think about this, right? In a sense, right? It was Ronald Reagan's fault that we went through this austerity of David Stockton and programs were slashed, right? Very easy to project that outward in a certain way.
Well, that's what Trump is a master at. I mean, he's always
Yeah,
projecting
good
out,
point.
looking for.
You gonna go to Peter's thing?
It's I'll try, yeah.
Yeah, it's the Psychoanalytic Institute of Columbia.
I just finished reading Fire and Fury in the White House, which is really something. Yeah, Doug Henwood gave it a good review, so.
He did?
Yeah, he did a two-part critique, but anyway, Trump, he seems resolute, but he is actually the most irresolute person because
Of course.
he's always
Yeah.
going, you know,
Waffles.
his compass is going back and forth, but wherever
Right.
it lands,
Right.
you know, Sessions is the problem, or, you know.
Right. But the thing here is, how do you articulate, you know, the inauthentic response to being towards death? I'm not saying we go out there and put our, you know, lives and, you know, right on the line every day. This is not the issue here. The issue here is how, you know, we deny our finitude. You know, Heidegger really begins with human finitude. We deny this. We're always in denial about our mortality. You know, it's very easy for us to project outward, right, onto something else, right, than to see this as much more of a dialectical tension, you know, and how, you know, and examine how we're perceiving this moment in history. I perceive this moment in history personally, this Trump is exactly what is in the cards. You know, it's something that was due, you know, it would come out of the Americanization, what I read earlier today about the sheets, you know, the shit that the Italian, I'll read from the New York Review of Books, when an Italian art dealer told Tina Brown about the American way of life, right? Anyway, I mean, yeah. And, you know, all this talk about his misogyny, about the patriarchy and all this is so embedded in the American culture to begin with, right? He is just in a sense, what I'm sorry?
It's very clear, I mean,
Yeah.
how easily it
Yeah,
is.
how easily
comes to the
manipulable it
surface.
is, yeah, And what I said, you know, what I read from my notebooks on political apathy. We've come to a place where we can be manipulated and persuaded to the point of not caring anymore.
What
This
happens-
is why this is
yeah.
very important, this section.
What happens
to
when you
take care
foreclose
of the
politics?
you
When you
foreclose
foreclose
politics.
and it's just political economy, you know?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
There's no way to think
Yeah.
about your.
So busily losing himself in the Rachel Maddow show, excuse me, in what is taken care of, the irresolute person, right, loses his time in them too. Oh, look how clever she is. Oh, she's got a piece of paper. The memo tonight, folks. You know, right? Right. Anyway, and then, hence, his characterized way of talking, I have no time. I had to watch Rachel. I had no time to read my Heidegger. Anyway, whatever, right? Just as the person who exists inauthentically constantly loses time and never has any. Right?
This is
Never have
alienation
enough time.
again,
Beautiful.
in a different way.
Beautiful alienated time.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. Alienated time. This is the temporality of alienation. Right? Yeah. This is a smart group. Okay, just as the person who exists inauthentically, who never has any, is the distinction of the temporality of authentic existence, and in resolution, it never loses time, and it already has time. Right? Very good, huh? Always has time. Yep. For the temporality of resoluteness has in regard to its presence the character, and here we go, the Augenblick, the moment, right? Right? The moment's authentic making presence of the situation does not itself take the lead, but is maintained in the future that has been. Lenin in Zurich, right? Existence, defined by the moment, and you see the Augenblicklich, right? Existence, temporalizes itself as faithfully whole, stretching along in the sense of the authentic, historical constancy of the self.
Event.
Was that, I'm sorry?
That's the very event.
Yes,
Or but-
this is the event here, yes. The kind of temporal existence constantly has its time for that which the situation requires for it, you know?
It's so incredibly political here.
Yes.
It's like so radically political.
Yeah.
Yes.
If the Nazis were reading this carefully, that would have been even more powerful.
That's what,
Maybe they did.
That's what he bemoaned. As I said, it was a big idea with a lot of small people around it. Right? All right. This kind of temporal existence constantly has time for that which the situation requires it for.
That's amazing.
This is
That's
a great
really good.
passage.
Yeah.
I had to read this aloud, right? But resoluteness discloses the there in this way only as situation. Very interesting, huh? The there-ness of the situation, right? The orientation and situation together, right? Thus, the resolute person can never encounter what is disclosed in such a way that he could lose his time on it in an irresolute way. Right? Okay? Factically thrown design can take and lose time for itself only because the time is allotted to it, temporality, ecstatically stretched along with the disclosedness of the there that's grounded in that temporality. If you have the time for revolution as the title of one Negre book, you know, this kind of stuff we just read is very important in it. Yeah, yeah. And it's been time for revolution for a long time.
So we do.
I mean, you know, it's very overdue. You know, the due date has been, you know, long overdue. You know that faith, pistos in Greek, in the old Christian calendar means credit, give credit. Faith is really giving credit. You're crediting God. It's a creditor-debtor relationship. Very intelligent, these, you know, yeah. As disclosed, design exists factically in the mode of being with the others. Keeps itself in a public average, right? Remember, intelligibility, the now that, the then what, when, interpreted and expressed in everyday being with one another are understood in principle, although they are unequivocally dated only within limits. And so he's talking about here, again, the limits of datability, right? And this datability is coming out of still the common conception and the vulgar conception of time, right? Right? In the nearest, being with one another, several people can say now together. The Beatles come together, right? And each now date the now, right? In a different way. Now that this or that happens. The now expressed is spoken by each one in the publicness of being with one another in the world. The time interpreted and expressed by a particular design is thus always already made public as such on the basis of the ecstatic being in the world. Since everyday taking care understands itself in terms of the world taken care of, it knows the time that it takes for itself, not as its own, but rather heedfully exploits the time, that there is, right? The time with which the they reckons. But the publicness of time is all the more compelling by the more factical design explicitly takes care of time by expressly taking it to account. Okay? All right, so now he's going to go on to the publicness of time and what public time means, right? We're sort of back with the dictatorship of the they, but now in a different dimension with public time, which is neither, in my view, you know, you first have to ask, where does this public time come from? That's what he does. And then he talks about it's a time which measures. It becomes a series of now moments. It's a measurable time. The measuring device is really at the basis of publicness. How do you measure time, right? Okay? You guys understand that? I mean, you know, again, this is, in a way, part of the product of calculated rationality. You can say capitalism. You can say Newtonian time, which is capitalist time in many ways, right? We're not on Einsteinian time in capitalism. The derivatives may want to try to go to that, but do so under a kind of rule of exploitation, you know, in terms of the, you know. I mean, that's certainly, to me, that's the Promethean urge of the current hedge fund and the speculators, is to be Einsteinian in their version of time rather than Newtonian. The old markets are Newtonian. The new markets are trying to come up with the theories of relativity and the speed of light. Has flash trading, you know, hyper-algorithmic trading systems, all these kind of things. That's the desirability that's
The interesting thing is, if they do that, then they go beyond the problematic of the human, of design. You're just in the realm of pure nature.
Well,
matter and atoms.
He would criticize that completely, and this is a problem in terms of mathematical ontology, ultimately.
So the conditions
Yes.
for their success are the conditions for our disappearance from the world, in a way.
It is the
If
conditions for
capitalists
this.
succeed
Yes,
in
well, it's
that,
supposed to show you the
we're
death
gonna be
drive
needless.
that's inherent to capitalism in a certain way, even though it functions highly profitably on this death
They're
drive.
making us extinct.
Yeah, yeah,
with that kind
you know,
of-
the one-eyed Undertaker and Dylan, you know. Right, yeah. And Einstein ends up playing violin on Desolation Row. I mean, the poets sometimes really have this down in terms of the metaphorics that are happening, right? Even the popular poets, such as the Randy Newmans, the Parodical, the Dylans, and the Leonard Cohens, in my view, they really understand this, right? In many ways, in a different way. Yeah. One of the reasons we take to them so much, they express this in, you know, very accessible ways. Okay, so anyway, so we have this, a time that measures. The measuring device, again, is at the basis of public time. Public time is neither subjective nor objective, so the old subject-object or the subjective and the objective are not working here, because the subjective is the subject in the world, and the objective is really, you know, this public time comes before knowing. Yeah, it's a priori, again, right? So, yeah. So the basis for time, where he's really going here, the basis, the ground he's trying to use, is design's temporality for time. It is through Dasein's temporality that we will come to an understanding of time. Through the there being of us, not the subject, right? Or the objective, right? Not through the mode of the it is really through the mode of the subject in the world, or the objective a priori that we know before knowing, before we have any objective knowing in the world. And this goes back again to that crucial distinction that's made between the ready to hand and the present to hand of the things in the world. This goes back to the theory of technics, in some ways, that, in the ready to hand, it's in the world, right? This is happening, right? In the present to hand, you can say the objectivity in the present to hand and the now time of the present time is actually, this is before knowing, we cannot get to that objective time that way, right? Yeah. Okay, I'm just gonna move forward a little bit and then I'll finish up for today, since this is complicated stuff. So the next section is about ordinary time. And ordinary time lacks datability. This is section 81. It is basically time by the clock, lacks significance, and it's seen as infinite, right? This is section 81, right? Right? So always the then and the now, the datability is always existential, not ordinary. Okay? Now, always beginning with the existential. The Dasein, again, is the basis for temporality. And I discovered, rereading this, why he doesn't mention Spinoza in the history of being. Heidegger is against time under the species, subspecies aeternitas. He's against the infinity, right? But time is always under the aspect of finitude. To be, for Heidegger, is to be in time. Okay? To be in time, right? And anything authentic must be finite, right? And any authentic existence is to become aware of one's finitude. Always already happening. This is going on in section 81. Very important. We're going to come back to this too. Human finitude as the limit, right, etc. Right? And the knowing. Again, the attack continues on, quote, objectivity, right? Scientific objectivity, right? And also always coming back. Okay. And then I'll do this, and then we maybe talk a little bit about some of the other things in the book. Section 82 is really about Hegel, and it looks like to me this is a long discussion of that section 82, this lecture. Yeah, this is what it looks, and I thank you. I'm gonna lose a lot of practical time this week going over this. I'm gonna have to go to a lot of theoretical time.
No pressure.
Yeah, no, I hear you. But I wanted to, I get obsessed, so, I'll
You have
talk.
time for it.
I have time for it. Yes, I'm already in time with it, that's right.
You know what Miles
Anyway,
Davis said, right?
what?
About time.
What did he say?
They said, they're like, how does it feel to be always ahead of the times, He said, I don't know about that. He said, I'm in time, everybody else is behind the time.
Yeah, it's good. It's good. I might not be ahead, but everybody else is behind. Nothing like that.
He's just
That's
in the
pretty
now,
good.
you know?
Yeah, he was in the now, yeah. Anyways.
The rest are still playing bebop.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, Sun Ra, there are others, but yeah.
Sun Ra was done too nice to Coltrane.
He wasn't?
No. Said stole everything from him. That's what he said.
It's possible.
And they asked Coltrane about that. Maybe so. Sun's great. Yeah. Yeah. Gilmore used to play with me occasionally. Yeah. Anyway, okay. Section 82, very important about Hegel, right? And he's going to really engage here the time as existentially meaningful, significant. And this is correlative, and maybe why Derrida, listen, I haven't read it yet, but I'm trying to think this through as we discussed, why Derrida will spend so much time with Hegel, because this is akin, this existential significance of time is akin to Hegel's notion of Geist as time, right? You know, the Zeit als Geist, right? is very close to this. So he begins with Hegel's concept of time, page 407, and we're going to go over this very carefully next week. I mean, I will not do it justice even if we stay another 45 minutes, which would be 6 o'clock, you know, I mean, would be 4 hours, you know, into the, I mean, I can do it, but I don't want, you know, I don't want us to use too much time to, you know, anyway. All right, again.
Time is money.
Yes, that's what the capitalist says.
Of course.
Yes, indeed.
That's got to be one of the worst reductions in human history. Right?
Well, the interesting thing is if you go back and you read Aristotle on time and money, and you look at some of Jacques Le Goff's reading of the Middle Ages, that equation is operative very early on in the history of Western thought.
But didn't Aristotle allocate that kind of thinking to just one of the?
Well, yes, but
one of the mind,
the
one of the strands
gymnastics is this.
of
The
the
best
good
book
life.
on this, by the way, I recommend this book, again, another one to study. It's difficult. One of Deleuze's pupils. It's called Capital Times by Eric Adiez.
Is it in English?
Yes, it's in English. Yeah, 2 of his books are in English. Yeah.
What is it? It's
Capital Times. And it's a reading of Marx through Aristotle. And there's a lot on time is money in this, yeah, Capital Times. I'll bring a copy of it with me next week. It's near the red book. Flash on it. Remember David's book.
Please.
Yeah. Okay, so listen, time is grounded by Hegel through the negation of the negation. That's how Hegel grounds time versus that of Dasein's existence, right? Versus existence. And as part of the dialectical scheme, you know, how this works out, punctuality is time for Hegel, right? Time is spirit, right? Okay? For Heidegger, we're already in time all the time. No, that doesn't mean that punctuality. We're already in time. So we'll go over this carefully. Let me just read a couple of sections here and then point out what he's maybe trying to do, and then we'll finish up for today. So if you look at you know, the way this is structured, the contrast of the existential and the ontological connection of temporality, Dasein, and world time. And this is where Mr. Derrida begins, section 82, you know, Professor Derrida, world of Hegel's conception of the relation between time and spirit, page 406, right? History, which is essentially the history of spirit, runs its course in time. Thus, the development of history falls into time. This is Hegel on the understanding of history, you know, the introduction to world history, he's quoting. But Hegel is not satisfied with establishing the within-timeness of spirit as a fact. Rather, he attempts to understand how it is possible for spirit to fall into time, which is the completely abstract, the sensuous. Time must be able to receive spirit, as it were. And spirit must in turn be related to time and its essence. Thus, we must discuss 2 things. How does Hegel define the essence of time? And 2, what belongs? He would enjoy the fact that we're laughing. I think Heidegger. He'd say, "Yes, indeed, I have been very thorough here. You're just learning, right?" What belongs to the essence of spirit that makes it possible for it to fall into time?
But see, it's interesting methodologically, he always does this. He asks a question, a fundamental question, and then he kind of asks the pre-fundamental question, the conditions for it. That's the method.
For the thing.
He keeps doing that.
Yes, very smart.
Yeah.
What are the conditions behind this, right? Our answer to these three questions will serve merely, I emphasize, to elucidate our interpretation of Dasein's temporality, and do so by way of a comparison. So here it is. This is the comparison in his lectures. Derrida's, yeah? This is where he's going. He reads carefully Derrida, and then he builds a course on a couple of sentences. It's good. All right. We shall make no claim to give a relatively complete treatment of criticizing Hegel, because Hegel's concept of time presents the most radical way in which the vulgar understanding of time has been given form. The vulgar concept of time, crucial, has been given form conceptually, and one that has received too little attention. The contrast of this concept with the idea, temporality, that we have expounded is one that especially suggests itself. Okay? So there's a lot here going on. We're going to look at the essence, right, of time as defined from Hegel. We're going to look at the conditions that make it possible for this to fall into time, and what's difference between this falling into time in Hegel versus Heidegger's falling prey, the verfallen that we do. Trying to draw some connections internally again from the text, right? We're going to do this. We have no intention, right, of criticizing Hegel, but we want to trace this vulgar conception of time fundamentally from Aristotle to Hegel. Aristotle on the now is stigma, the comparisons, and you're going to begin to see these comparisons in the footnote on page 41, on footnote number 30 in this chapter, right? Yeah, you're going to begin to see the comparisons. Okay? And he goes on, and maybe we'll read just a little bit of this, and then we can pick up with this next week, and then go into all sort of the philosophy of history. Okay, A. Subsection A. I love it. Hegel's concept of time. The systematic place in which a philosophical interpretation of time is carried out can only serve as a criterion for understanding the basic guideline which leads to the fundamental conception of time. The first traditional, thematic, detailed interpretation of the vulgar understanding of time is to be found in Aristotle's physics. Now, of course, if you're not a good reader, you're going to think, what does the vulgar mean, etc. He's talking about the way the Western metaphysics has taken up temporality. That's all. This is in the vulgar notion. He is going to try to destroy this and show it, right, as being inadequate. Right? That's why it's ordinary or vulgar together. Anyways, right? In the context of an ontology of nature and time, nature as time, very interesting. Physis is the Greek word for nature, where we get physics from. Physis. Yeah? Hegel's analysis of time, in the context, time is connected with location and motion, and like I said, this is in the fourth book of the physics, and particularly chapter 10 is where Heidegger is going to engage. True to the tradition, Hegel's analysis of time has its place in the second part of his Encyclopedia of the Philosophical Sciences, bearing the title, The Philosophy of Nature. The first division treats mechanics. Its first section is a discussion of space and time, dedicated to a discussion of space and time. They are the abstract outside of one another. Although Hegel puts space and time together, this does not amount simply to juxtaposing them externally, space and also time. Philosophy fights against this also. The transition from space to time does not mean that they are treated in adjoining paragraphs. It's very good, by the way. But space itself goes over. Space is, in quotation mark, time. That is, time is the truth of space. It's an encyclopedia of philosophical sciences on the philosophy of nature. According to Hegel, if space is thought dialectically in what it is, this being of space reveals itself as time. how must space be thought? Now, I can promise you, David Harvey has not read this carefully. Even though he has built a whole career, I promise you. And those people who talk about capital as a spatial, configuration, and they want to talk about this as, spatial domination.
They take space vulgar, literally, sort of in the
Literally,
most
in a
immediate
lot of ways.
sensation
Well,
of
or
space.
more in the Kantian sense than really in this
Yeah.
Hegelian, Heideggerian sense.
But Marx read this
Very
very
much.
carefully.
Well, he read Hegel's.
I mean, Hegel's,
Yeah. Okay, so space is the unmediated indifference of nature's being outside itself.
It's pretty good. Hegel's pretty good.
This is Hegel, in the
Hegel's
Zuzach.
pretty good too.
In the Zuzach,
You
just
know?
taking a position.
Yeah.
This is preliminary positions, right? Yeah, this means the space is the abstract multiplicity of the points distinguishable in it. Now this would make for a good Marxist analysis, the points distinguishable in it. Space is not interrupted by these points, but neither does it first arise from them by way of joining them together. Space, differentiated by the differential points that are themselves in space, remain undifferentiated. The differentiations themselves have the nature of what they differentiate. Nevertheless, the point is a negation of space in that it differentiates something in space, though in such a way that it remains in space as this negation. The point, after all, space. Point does not lift itself out of space as something other than space. Space is the undifferentiated, outside one another, of the multiplicity of points. But space is not a point. It is rather, as Hegel says, punctuality, where I began, with Hegel, that the negation of the negation is punctuality. This is the basis of the statement in which Hegel thinks space in its truth, which is as time. And he quotes now Hegel again from the encyclopedia now. Negativity, which related itself as point to space, and in which it develops its determinations as line and plane, is however in the sphere of self-externality, equally for itself and its determinations, but at the same time as positing in the sphere of self-externality, it appears as indifferent to that which is quietly side by side. Thus, posited for itself, it is time. That's worth thinking about, and you can get a good essay on the Russian, constructivist theory.
And this is also an example of dialectics.
Absolutely, it's dialectics
Mediation
at work.
and all those things.
Absolutely, at work. This is
At
the
the same
negation of
time,
the
it
negation
appears as
at work.
something else, and
Yes,
yeah.
this is the negation of the negation, and how we get to punctuality as a concept of time. This is where he's going here, right? Okay. So through point, right? And all this is not coming from the phenomenology or the logic, it's coming from the encyclopedia in the relation to the philosophy of nature. It's not coming from the other parts of the Hegelian system, right? The phenomenology is a small part of the system, by the way. Right? Very small part of the system. People forget that. They
The
think
logic
that-
is 3 books.
Yes, the logic is the lesser, the greater logic, right? Yes, that's right. Then the encyclopedia,
ontology
the
section.
lectures on the history of philosophy, the philosophy of right, which is certainly worth reading today in terms of liberal philosophy. That should be a real, a must read. Again, I haven't read it in years, but I know it fairly well, on the transition from the family to civil society to the state. Very important to look at. Really gives you a whole sense of the German bureaucracy and, what bureaucracy really looks like. That's the philosophy of right, and then of course the philosophy of history, in which Jeremy Glick, none of you were there, but he started with Hegel and the Africans. He said that the Africans needed to be instructed didactically. So the racial stuff, I'm sure Russell Dale played on this forever, right, Chris? Okay, anyway. All right, so anyway, Then he's gonna go in, maybe I should, just stop here because the next section is complicated. It's on representation of space, right? So we're gonna go through representations and all this. This is a very crucial chapter, and I agree in a way that, in the Derridian moment that you could, the note on the note is very important in the sense that this is a section in which you retroactively read this section, this whole book. I think we've done it properly in a way. We've set out the outline. We've gone through some of the most crucial sections. Now we're going to go back to see history as time, right? History and temporality from here. So we're in the meat, if you will, of the unfinished project. We're at the, as Heidegger would say, we're only at the mere beginning here, 78 through 83. Yeah, so, yeah.
Maybe it became too overwhelming. You had to take a break.
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah. Can you
It's
imagine?
exhausting.
Well, yeah, and then he did all this stuff on the schematism. If you look at Kant and the problem of metaphysics, he's breaking down schematic reasoning. Yeah, it's pretty amazing what he's doing there. And then, of course, the debates with Husserl about what is knowledge and, how far Husserl went, but not far enough. And, it's really on the Abgrund where the violence is really taking place here. And then, and then fleshing this out later in Time and Being, which is very short, but again, dense, where time becomes the event of appropriation. Time is the event of appropriation. So, anyway, all right, I'll wait for Chris to come back. Yeah, so we'll begin again with this whole section on Hegel as time. I'll do this next week too. I did a very good diagram of the play of light in Plato's allegory of the cave, and what it means to see, and what it means on darkness and light. So I was going to do this both Friday and by view, and then I can do it here. So I did a pretty elaborate, both diagram and I added to it in terms
scan it
of
and
light,
put it on the-
1,
put it on
2, 3,
Facebook.
4,
Put it on Facebook.
4 things of levels of mathematics, dialectic.
You're doing this next time? Mike?
Yeah, I'm gonna do this next time. Yeah, I'll bring in copies. Yeah. I'll bring in copies. Yeah. I think I've done some of this with you in terms of the vertical and the horizontal and vertical movement of the ascension from the cave up, right? But I'm doing this in terms of the true idea. For Badiou, the true idea and why he's doing all this thing, the imminence of truth, he's really trying to salvage communism. There's no question about it, towards the future. The true idea is communism, right? So this is the movement, right? He's really building towards this in a philosophical sense. He's taken on this very ambitious project, So it's not only the idea and the hypothesis, it's also then becomes the imminence of truth, or the true idea, because he has truth procedures along the way, when you begin to see a system at work, So it'd be something we can do, as an extrapolation, but it also fits Heidegger in terms of where he talks about light. I don't know if you remember in the section about sundial, he uses the sundial and light and dark, and he uses clocks. Yeah, you saw a section? Go ahead. Yeah, that's okay. I'm in no rush. It's up to you guys.
Isn't that funny? Time is the making present of the moving pointer.
That's incredible.
You can see him in the plot forest.
In the forest. I don't think he used notebooks though. He didn't have notebooks apparently when he walked. He just kind of remembered everything. It was all committed to memory.
Oh, yeah, we got the walking
There was no
stick.
like note taking.
And the walking stick. Oh, no, it's good committed to memory. Yeah.
Adorno said he also memorized the train timetable to the village. To the hut. He stabbed at him.
Yeah.
He took it. The man who remembered he
Even the
enjoyed
time
nature,
thing, yeah, I don't
but
remember.
he also
I'll memorize the time
train
thing.
timetable.
Well, like Gregor Samsa in the Top Gun. He missed the train one day. It's good, yeah. So you can do a lot with this, obviously, beyond Monty Python, you know, hopefully yeah. You like Monty Python?
I used to.
Yeah, I like it too, yeah. Well, we can do more now, you know, we can do DC Comics. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know if you saw the photograph, I kept it at home, I'm gonna use it in class, but if you remember Suitor in V is from Vendetta, the tyrant.
movie or
The movie, yeah, if you remember, the picture of Trump at Davos is exactly like Suitor in V is from Vendetta, the movie, 10 years later. It's amazing. I'm gonna use it with my students, because I'm sure, I wanna flip out my students this semester, I'm doing Snowpiercer, V is for Vendetta, Battle of Algiers, Burn, you know, doing a lot of good films here, yeah.
Is this section on?
Yes,
time,
please, yeah.
Also where a lot of the architecture.
Yes,
People have.
yes, exactly.
developed, right?
Yeah, it's a lot of, yeah, spatiality, environmental, also in the section on things ready to have and ready, present to have.
Okay.
And by the way, Cecil sends his best. He gave me a call. He's sorry he can't make it, and you know he's doing okay. I have a video if you're interested in him, photographs of him giving presentations to the Long Island Nassau Community Council on a project his firm's doing out there.
Is it the redoing of the
Yeah, it's
Coliseum?
all kinds of nonsense. Yeah. But they have a big project out there, so he's been working on that. I told him he should get the gig here for the 35 story thing, but I don't think that the architects on it would be good. Yeah. And then of course everybody believes, this academic vice president, oh, we're getting some floors in that residential building. Yeah, can you imagine? The
No
real
way.
estate people and the
They
people,
want money.
they're gonna buy residence, they're gonna get, oh, we're getting some floors. Can you imagine? Oh, you're gonna live, the first 4 floors are LIU.
Yeah, right.
And, you know, and you go to floor 5 to floor 35, give me a break, you know? Yeah. They're gonna build little outposts somewhere, separate entrance.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And then the question is, affordable housing? It's not affordable, but, you know.
We got emails from CUNY, the
About
union,
affordable housing?
that they want, there was some kind of an initiative which the city gave city employees affordable housing, so we got the link, Stuyvesant Town. 2-bedroom apartment for $3,700, which is essentially my entire salary for the month. So that's affordable housing. That's a great victory for
The
the
2
New York
bedrooms.
City Public Works.
Yeah, yeah.
2 bedrooms, $3,700.
You could have gotten better over on Myrtle Avenue, I should have let you know about that, it was only
Who can afford
31.
to pay $3,000?
No, I mean, no, I tell you who can afford to
What they
pay
call
3,700 a month,
affordable
are the
is-
people that are making 200,000 a year, there's a
More,
couple. or
$500,000
more.
to $1 million
Yeah,
a
yeah,
year.
yeah,
You got it.
yeah. Yeah, no, it's insanity
Well,
what's
the
going on.
stock market
City
keeps
of,
plummeting.
it went down, but.
It's been going down, yeah, lower, so people who can afford it will.
But you know, I heard that your friend Tim Cook of Apple Computer, you know, had a very long meeting with the people before the tax bill was written.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
They're slipping. He doesn't have the notions of aesthetics that the other guy did, yeah. He doesn't read
John
philosophy.
was the master, silhouette, shadow, and.
The guy was reading
Right,
philosophy, or
yeah,
at least some part of
definitely,
it.
A master of that kind of stuff.
This guy is just,
Yeah,
No, I
they
know.
say
believes in
that
human
is-
rights and
Yeah.
all these other things that.
But in this section, great, Heidegger, on time, I mean, you know, when you really read it twice, you really get a lot out of it about how we go about living by Clocktown, what datability is, all these kind of things versus that, you know, the Hegelian notion of time, how this vulgar concept is constituted, and then versus what, you know, he's sort of proposing. And when we get back to history, we can talk about this in terms of the 18th Brumaire, repetition, you know, some of the other people in you know, the history of temporality, yeah. 'Cause the 18th Brumaire is probably Marx's great statement on temporality. Yeah, I mean, he never writes on time itself, I mean, you know, never a treatise. Time of labor, you know, labor time, obviously, yeah, but that's datability. That's within the calculations, you know, of time, that's not, you know, yeah. Yeah. And Marx is aware, I mean, it's not like he's gonna say, you know, yeah.
You know, when I was in Bulgaria, a lot of our counterparts there,
Yeah.
they study Marx intensely and
Our comrades. huh?
comrades, and very intensely, and I just don't know Capital at all compared to them. And they go into the drafts, and there were like 7 or 8 different drafts that were
Yes.
published by the Soviets, like thousands of pages. And Marx includes in the final drafts some of the earlier drafts rather than the later. It's an interesting history of the construction of the text where he wasn't sure. And if you read these 7 drafts, along with the Grundrisse and what was published by Marx, you get a totally expanded notion of the concepts. Whereas if you just read like David Harvey does, just volume 1 of what was published, you get a very stunted, you miss a lot of the...
By the way, Harvey is supposed to be giving it's a joke, an accelerated 5-day intensive seminar on the 3 volumes of Capital for this new people's forum. And I've decided after they asked us for all
should do a
kinds
slow
of this,
reading
I'm not gonna use that space. I'm in discussion about
Really?
other things, yeah. We'll see, but yeah.
The politics don't sound...
It's horrible, man. It's horrible. I mean, we'll go maybe we'll do one there, but to have a
what we can do?
long-going collaboration. I think I'm gonna be able to maybe get some decent high school stuff. I've been talking to a guy named Alan Schulman, who's an ex-principal, who's a lefty, about, other kinds of space, I mean, I would love to have this room.
Or we
every
can
week,
rent commercial,
but
like WeWork and all these offices, we can rent space
Or
there
we should
probably.
just buy rent an
capitalists don't
apartment
care,
ultimately. Just rent an apartment.
You can just rent places.
A nice room this
That's true,
size
too.
with a little place to
Yeah.
make coffee or something, just something like that. And have it as a regular center and meeting center, and program and get a movie projector or a DVD projector and a screen. We could do film, we could do, all kinds of stuff. Yeah. I mean, it might work because I find all kinds of politics. This is really a kind of front for this new poor people's movement.
What?
The new poor people's movement.
That's a
It's
horrible
William
title.
Barber.
Oh, yeah.
This is what it's a front for.
Baltimore.
Yeah. What's that?
No, Carolina, I think, right? Barber.
Yeah, Barber. Yeah.
North or South Carolina.
I mean, he's a nice guy. He's well-meaning. He's semi-articulate.
I didn't realize that it's grown into such a big movement.
Well, we'll see.
Poor people's.
Well, this is for the Democratic Party, in my opinion. I don't want to participate
Yeah.
in anything that smacks of that.
I know.
This is ridiculous to me. I mean, these people are impotent. You look at what they're doing. I mean, Trump runs roughshod over them every step of the way. They sit there at the State of the Union looking like zombies, like this. Like this. And then they get Joe Kennedy, who's not really that lefty at all, to make the speech. And what are they trying to do? Bring back Camelot with this?
Yeah, 'cause
I mean, give me a break. And that was nothing to us. I mean,
Well,
what
he
a
was
joke
always-
that was.
Yeah, I
Lyndon
know.
Johnson was more radical than the Kennedys. He was a cracker from
The
Texas.
camera angles for Kennedy were really interesting. The whole setting for Joe Kennedy was really.
Oh, in the working class, yeah.
No,
So
it was-
we've gone from
Johnson
Joe the
was working
plumber.
class.
Who was the worker they brought up? The welder.
Joe the plumber?
No, they had the welder
That
this
was
time. The
the
black welder.
Oh,
The
That's
black
a joke.
welder was in the audience. I'm masochistic enough to watch this nonsense. I
Don't
take notes.
watch it. You
I
guys
take
are
notes.
crazy.
Tell me about it,
Watch
Chris.
it.
It's
Tell me
really
about
interesting.
it. No, it's good to study the colors, to whom they're
Fire and
speaking,
fury,
and
know
it's
the
very
backstory
good to
to
look
all
at
these
this at
people.
work, I'm telling you.
I watched the state
No,
of the...
I know,
I watched the State of the Chinese Union where the chairman
Well, that was
spoke.
even better.
It was much more interesting.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, there was
It's the
like
future.
long-term
It's
horizon
the future,
thinking, there was
Mr.
some
Guest.
citations from Marx.
Right.
you know.
That's right.
Everybody was assigned to
They
read.
are the future, yeah, no problem.
The party's been assigned to catch up on Marxism, Leninism, Maoism. So there's
That's
study
good.
groups
Catch
now.
up.
Again,
That's good.
you have to
Catch
know,
up.
the basics
Yeah.
to avoid becoming Gorbachev. That was the
He
message.
said that.
Yeah.
Avoid becoming Gorbachev. That's a great word.
Avoid his fate of becoming Gorbachev.
It's
said
like
today,
Putin,
China-
avoid becoming Yeltsin again, right?
He said, the slogan is,
Drink less.
flies and tigers will fall. Some old imperial quote.
That's great.
Anyway, just back to Joe Kennedy is one of the few supposedly liberal Democrats that didn't sign on to single payer.
I know that.
Shows where he stands.
It's unbelievable
Yeah.
that they would pick someone like that. And you look at Pelosi, I mean, that's the night of the
Like a
living
ghost,
dead.
like a ghost.
Night of the living dead between her and Schumer. Schumer's in the chair like this, and, you know.
It's a horrible group.
Yeah. Pelosi's gone to my cousin too many injections, right? I mean, she's looking. Yeah.
Your cousin's a Botox,
She's the Botox queen of New Orleans. She gets a place in the French Quarter. Saturday only. Around the block lined up.
Yeah.
interesting.
Around the block. She made enough to, you know.
Insurance doesn't
yeah.
pay for that, right?
No. Yeah. Yeah. Marilyn Pelias. She advertises. Loves me. Oh, Michael, you know, you're the radical in the I mean, you know, black sheep all the way. I love you, Michael. I love you. You know, I'm pretty radical. I'm a communist. I was like, really, Meryl? Really? She's giving Botox? Yeah. Should be giving, you know, put a little something extra in there. Mix up the medicine differently. Yeah. She's good people, though. She adopted a very nice kid, you know. Yeah. She has 5 from the previous marriage, you know.
Anybody seen this?
Yeah. You gonna go? You gonna try the